What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto faked his death in Wave? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. What are you doing? I'm walking, a smooth male voice said, annoyance creeping into his tone. To where? There was a pause. To Konoha, he said, rolling his eyes upwards to try and see the large orange frog sitting on his head. Konoha? Why are you going back there? I thought you. Why do you keep showing up? Gamakichi, the man interrupted. I haven't summoned you. He felt the frog's front flippers on his forehead as he shifted, so as to place his orange face upside down in his eyesight. I like the company, Gamakichi said flatly. The man snorted. He would hardly consider himself good company. He knew that the frog really popped up randomly because he thought he could use the company. Gamakichi was still in his eyesight, looking at him, and the man used his forefinger to gently push him back onto his head, a silent invitation to stay. Neither frog nor man said anything for the larger portion of the day, mainly because the man had begun to run, leaping from tree to tree, and the frog had to concentrate his energy to hold onto his head. The man's hair was completely covered by a ninja forehead protector, which had been turned into a bandana, and without hair for traction it was harder to hang on. The sun was dipping behind the horizon as he pulled to a sudden stop. Gamakichi would have flown from his head if he had been a normal frog. From his spot in a tree near the edge of the forest he could see the gates of Konoha, tall and proud, and closed. With a sigh he leapt from the tree. Bright blue eyes looked upwards, trying to see the frog on his head. The orange amphibian got the hint. Call me if you need me, kid, the frog said, disappearing with a puff of smoke. He snorted at the word kid, thinking the frog should have stopped using it 5 years ago when he reached the age of 20, then, with a shake of his head he moved towards the gate. The two guards stationed at the gate straightened as the stranger approached. They had never seen him before, and although he looked normal enough, in times such as these, with missing nin becoming more and more common, they had to be careful. There was nothing distinguishing about him. He wore deep navy blue pants, a shuriken holster on his right thigh. His shirt was the same color as his pants and was short-sleeved, revealing lightly muscled shoulders. His arms were wrapped from his biceps to the knuckles on his fingers. The bottom of his face was covered with a dark mask, very much like a Junin they knew, but, unlike him, this man's hair was completely covered by his Hite-8, which, they realized with surprise, carried the symbol of the leaf. Can we help you? One of the guards, a Chunin, asked. I need to see the Hokage, the stranger stated, a deep voice coming from under his mask. Both guards were transfixed by his eyes, a shade of blue neither had ever seen. He raised an eyebrow at their staring. With a cough, the Chunin that had spoken first pulled his attention away from his eyes. Is she expecting you? He asked. I doubt it, he answered. I'm sorry but, it's important. The Chunin hesitated. There was urgency in the man's voice that made him believe him. We'll have an Anbu escort you, the Chunin finally said, nodding at his comrade, who disappeared in a puff of smoke. We can't take any chances these days. The stranger nodded. I understand. As a Chunin approached him after appearing in a puff of smoke he looked up. Not that the lower ninja could tell since he had his mask on. Sir, the Chunin said with a bow. There is a stranger at the gate wishing to speak with the Hokage. The Anbu captain didn't respond directly and the Chunin began to fidget, wondering if he had even heard him. Finally, he spoke. Did he say why? No, sir, but he claims it's important. We thought it would be best to have an Anbu escort him through the village. There was another pause before the captain spoke again, a twinge of annoyance in his voice. We cannot allow every man claiming he needs to speak to the Hokage into the tower. If it were important she would be expecting him, and she has mentioned nothing of it. Go back to your post and tell him no. This time it was the Chunin's turn to pause. Yes, sir, he finally said before disappearing. The Chunin these days weren't the brightest batch to ever grace Konoha, Sasuke thought, before continuing his rounds. When the Chunin returned the sun had fully set and the first stars of the night had begun to twinkle. I'm sorry, but the Anbu captain has refused to let you see the Hokage. The stranger heaved a loud sigh. This is what I get for trying to do this the nice way instead of just sneaking in, he muttered. Both the Chunin tensed at his words. Okay then, the stranger said. Thanks for your help. The Chunin's eyes widened as the stranger crouched low and leapt high above them before disappearing over the gate. Uchiha-san. Sasuke turned and saw the Chunin from earlier running towards him and rolled his eyes. He did enjoy the freedom his Anbu mask gave him. Uchiha-san. The man at the gate is in the village. What? Sasuke asked, his voice low. We informed him he could not enter and he leapt over the gate. Sasuke didn't wait for further elaboration. He quickly ran through the tower calling his Anbu to action and placing the building on full alert. After sending 2 Anbu to guard the Hokage, he made his way to the roof, watching his Anbu spread throughout the city, searching for the intruder. He didn't see anyone suspicious. Sharingan, he said, a quick seal going along with the word. If he hadn't been wearing his mask, anyone could have seen his normally deep gray eyes had turned blood red, 3 black dots around his pupils. There, Sasuke thought, watching a navy blue blur dash along the rooftops, heading towards the tower. He was fast, and Sasuke knew his Anbu would not be able to spot him, not without the help of the Sharingan. He began running towards the blur, leaping from roof to intercept him. Sasuke made it into his path, effectively blocking the man from continuing any further. The man stopped running, his momentum carried him and he slid along the cement roof in a crouch until he gained traction and stopped. The stranger stood, folding his arms across his chest. The Anbu in front of him was completely covered in a black robe. His hood was up and the robe billowed around him as the wind picked up. He almost laughed at the Anbu's mask, which was in the shape of a fox, small wooden ears sticking up. Didn't anyone ever tell you it's rude to stand in front of someone who's running? The man asked. Sasuke frowned, not that the intruder could see. There was a tone in his voice, he sounded almost amused. Didn't anyone ever tell you that it's rude to enter someplace you haven't been invited? He couldn't see the intruder's mouth, but the way his eyes crinkled, Sasuke thought he must have been grinning. He sucked in a breath when he caught sight of his eyes. A brilliant azure blue blinked at him, it was a shade he hadn't seen in years. Suddenly Sasuke hated this man. Only one person was allowed to have those color eyes and he was going to kill this man so he wouldn't have to look at them. As much as I'd love to play, the man said. I must be off. Sasuke tensed, dropping into a fighting stance as the man ran towards him. He wasn't prepared to see him leap over him, to the next roof, and continue running. Son of a... Sasuke said, twisting around and rushing after him. The man had made it into the tower before Sasuke caught up with him. How could he be so fast? Sasuke dove, catching the man around the waist. They fell forward, but the man was able to twist away from him and rolled to his feet. Sasuke twisted in midair to land steadily. You're quick, the intruder said, sounding impressed. But I really don't have time for this. He dropped into a fighting stance. Let's get this over with. Those blue eyes were taunting him and rage Sasuke hadn't felt since Itachi was alive boiled within him. Sasuke flew towards him, fist raised in a punch. The man dodged, aiming a high kick at his chest that Sasuke blocked. Fists and legs flew at one another, but the 2 men were almost equally matched. What the man lacked in the Sharingan he made up for with speed, and Sasuke found he couldn't lay a hit on him any more than the other could on him. They leapt apart, breathing heavily. What do you want with the Hokage? Sasuke asked, watching him carefully. Information. She wouldn't tell you anything. The blue eyes rolled. Not information from her. For her. Sasuke frowned behind his mask, dropping his guard slightly. For her? Yes. Next time you should ask before trying to beat the shit out of me, Teme. All reason left him at that. No one can call me that, he growled in a dangerously low voice. The blue eyes widened as the Anbu suddenly began focusing his chakra to his left hand, so much that it began to glow blue and sounded as if birds had entered the hallway and started chirping. His last coherent thought as the chakra-laden fist slammed him through the wall was, Sasuke. The Hokage and the 2 Anbu guarding her looked up in total surprise when a body crashed through the wall of her office. He slid along the floor, coming to a stop in front of her desk and out of her sight. Tsunade looked at the large hole in her wall to see her Anbu captain stride through, the remains of chakra still on his fist. All of those in the office were thankful he had his mask on, for the rage they could feel radiating from him made none of them eager to see the look on his face. Tsunade cleared her throat. Is this the intruder? She asked, unable to think of anything else to say. The Anbu captain nodded, but he suddenly tensed when the body in front of her desk, who should by all rights be unconscious for a few weeks, if not dead, began to move. The four people in the room watched in amazement as the navy blue-clad man stood shakily. Chidori? Overkill for calling you a bastard, don't you think? Sasuke was extremely grateful for his mask, which hid the fact that he was gaping open-mouthed at the man who didn't seem to have a mark on him. He was so confused the fact that the man knew the name of his jutsu went completely unnoticed. He recovered himself. Shall I try it again? Sasuke growled, chakra gathering again. The man turned from him. Tsunade Baba, he said quietly to the gaping woman behind her desk. I need to speak with you. She stiffened at the name and then quickly stood. Uchiha, that's enough. The chakra immediately dissipated. Hokage-sama? Sasuke asked, confused. The two of you, leave me, she said to the other Anbu. Sasuke, find Jiraiya. The three Anbu obviously didn't understand, but they did as they were told. What are you doing back, brat? She asked when the Anbu were gone. Her voice was rough, but it was covering for some emotions the man couldn't decipher. He played along. Don't growl at me like it's my fault, he said, crossing his arms. I wasn't planning on coming back. Tsunade, what's going on? A gruff voice asked. Naruto looked over to the hole in the wall, watching as a tall, sturdy man with long white hair steeped through. He had red lines running down his cheeks, looking like red tear streaks. Hey, Ero Sennin, the man said with a wave. Jiraiya stopped mid-walk and looked confusedly between the masked man and Tsunade. The twisted expression on her face was enough to tell him that nickname was not just a coincidence. What are you doing here? He whispered, resisting the urge to go hug the man. It seemed that Tsunade was doing the same. What a welcome, the blue-eyed man muttered. Sasuke came in from behind Jiraiya, moving over to the corner of the office and standing there quietly. Naruto couldn't see his face, but he could tell by the other man's posture that he was brooding. He smiled slightly under his mask. Some things have been going on, I thought they should be brought to your attention. We're aware of the sudden amount of missing nins from all of the hidden villages. That's why you had such trouble getting to me, Tsunade said. Does the fact that I did get to you tell you anything about your security? Naruto said cheekily. Sasuke straightened and was about to lunge at him when Tsunade held up a hand. Naruto continued. Anyway, I'd have been severely concerned if you weren't aware of the situation. The question is, do you know where the missing nins are? No one spoke. Akatsuki. Akatsuki was disbanded after the death of Itachi and the apprehension of 5 of the S-class nins, Sasuke said. As a key player in the entire affair, he had witnessed the end of Akatsuki. I know, Naruto said, pulling something from one of the pouches around his waist. It was a forehead protector. He tossed it onto Tsunade's desk and she picked it up to examine it. I was attacked the other day by a shinobi wearing this. He's one of Konoha's recent missing nins. Tsunade handed the Hite 8 to Jiraiya, a grim expression on her face. Sasuke could see the long horizontal scratch through the leaf symbol. Why did he attack you? Jiraiya asked. Actually there were about 4 of them. They approached me first. They're recruiting, that's why there's the sudden excess of missing nins. When I refused, they attacked. You didn't want to. Tsunade seemed to stumble over her words. Of course not, he said loudly. Just because the fox is evil doesn't mean I am. It hasn't taken me over, Tsunade Baba. Sasuke stilled. In a flash he had pulled off his Anbu mask and had the other man pinned up against the wall by his neck. Reaching up he pulled down the other man's mask. His blue eyes had widened, but he didn't struggle, mainly because he could barely breathe. Sasuke inhaled sharply when he saw the whisker marks he hadn't seen for 10 years. You, he hissed, hand tightening as red eyes bore into blue. Are supposed to be dead. He was so close Naruto could feel his breath on his face, which served to remind him about his own lack of air. He will be if you don't let him breathe, Sasuke, Jiraiya said. Realizing how tight his grip had become, Sasuke quickly released him. Naruto coughed, glaring at him and rubbing his neck. So, Jiraiya said after Naruto regained his breath. Akatsuki sought you out again? They did before, no reason to assume they wouldn't this time around. How did they know you're alive? Tsunade asked. Well, since only you and Ero Sennin knew, and I don't believe you would have told anyone. My only guess would be that the man everyone believes killed me isn't quite as dead as we thought, and is correcting a few rumors. Orochimaru, Tsunade and Jiraiya said. The missing nin are on the move. They've been moving steadily through the fire country. If Orochimaru is leading them, I have no doubt they're on their way here. He glanced at Sasuke, who was glaring at the floor with clenched fists. Okay, Tsunade said a while later. None of this is to be repeated. We do not need a panic on our hands. I will inform the Junin. Sasuke, put your Anbu on full alert. Naruto pulled up his face mask and prepared to leave. Where are you going? Tsunade asked. Wherever the wind may take me. Naruto said. You can't leave Konoha, Tsunade told him. What? Naruto said angrily. I came back here to warn you, not to be taken prisoner. We're not taking you prisoner, Naruto, but if Orochimaru is coming to attack, we could use your help. Also, you have to understand, if you leave and Akatsuki gets their hands on you. Right, Naruto interrupted, his voice cold. I forgot what a powerful weapon I am. Sasuke noticed that despite his anger, the look in his eyes was hurt. Where am I going to stay? A box on the street? Tsunade paused. She hadn't given much thought to that. You can stay with me, Sasuke spoke up, and everyone turned to him in surprise. All of them knew Sasuke was not the most social of people. Good, Tsunade said, settling the matter. Naruto looked around the room, the beginnings of panic working in his chest. He didn't want to be here, he didn't want to stay. He knew they wouldn't let him leave easily. Sasuke and two Sannin were formidable opponents, and while he could probably outrun them, if they caught him he wouldn't be afforded the courtesy of staying with Sasuke. He'd be thrown into a cell for who knew how long. With a defeated sigh he nodded. Perhaps he could slip away once he was at Sasuke's. They hadn't spoken the entire walk to Sasuke's. It was late at night and they ran into no one, something both men were thankful for. It was likely they wouldn't have been bothered, however, since Sasuke had managed to remain as unapproachable as ever, especially after becoming an Anbu. Only a few people still attempted to reach out to him, mainly Sakura, a few other shinobis they had been genin with, and, of course, Kakashi. Naruto looked around when they entered the gates of what he could only assume had been a lively community of Uchiha at one point. It was quiet and empty, and he felt sad, not only for the people who had once lived here, but also for the man walking beside him, who remained in this deserted little corner of Konoha alone. Naruto followed Sasuke into his house, being led through the living room and into the kitchen that was next to it. The house had a sterile, unused feeling to it. Naruto sat down at the kitchen table with a sigh, pulling his mask down. Sasuke had put his Anbu mask on before they left the tower, and now the fox face was turned towards Naruto. If you're going to stare at me, at least have the courtesy to do it without the mask, Naruto said, not looking at the Anbu that stood across the room. There was a pause and Sasuke pulled the wooden mask from his face, setting it on the counter he was leaning against. Naruto placed his elbows on the table, his head hung as he massaged the back of his neck. Sasuke said nothing. How long have you been in Anbu? Naruto finally broke the silence. 5 years. Congratulations. Where have you been? Sasuke said roughly, surprising him. Blue eyes looked up, narrowed in thought. Sasuke crossed his arms, showing his impatience, but said nothing. I've been around, mostly in the fire country. Sasuke glared at him. Why didn't you come back? You let us believe you were dead. Naruto didn't answer right away, a guarded expression on his face. It was better that way, he said. What could possibly be important enough to let us think you were dead? Do you have any idea what people went through? Iruka, Sakura, Kakashi. He stopped abruptly, but Naruto knew what the next word would have been. Me. It's a long story, Sasuke. Black eyes flared in anger and Sasuke crossed the room in a flash, slamming his palms into the table in front of Naruto, who shrank back in surprise. That's not a good enough answer, Dobi, he hissed. Naruto's eyes widened then narrowed angrily as Sasuke's tone and insult got the desired rise out of him. Don't act like I owe you explanations, Teme, he spat out. You never thought twice about me back then, don't try to pretend we're friends now. Sasuke straightened, and for a brief moment Naruto thought he looked hurt, but his general expression of indifference returned so quickly that Naruto had to assume he'd imagined it. So what really happened? Sasuke asked, his voice calm once more. Obviously Orochimaru didn't kill you. Sasuke, Naruto said softly, staring at his hands. I can't talk about this. I don't want to think, I don't want to remember. I did what I had to do. Please, he whispered, please just drop it. Sasuke didn't bother to try and hide the surprise on his face. Naruto wasn't looking at him anyway. As much as Naruto's words made him even more curious than before, his tone and his broken voice stalled all questions Sasuke had. Naruto's personality seemed drained. He was quiet now, reflective. Nothing like the loud-mouthed Dobi he'd known as a teenager. Why had he changed? He didn't press further, but turned, pulling some things out of his barely used cupboards. Naruto didn't look up until a steaming bowl of ramen was placed in front of him. He stared up at Sasuke, confused. The other man sat down across from him, digging into his own bowl of ramen, not meeting Naruto's eyes. With a grin, Naruto picked up his chopsticks. Anyo-sa, what about Neji? Sasuke sighed in annoyance. As they ate, Naruto had begun to ask him about his old friends and Sasuke had been updating him for the last hour on the lives of Iruka, Kakashi, Sakura, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Shikamaru, Hinata, and Lee. Thinking of all the others Naruto could ask about made Sasuke mentally groan. "Dobi, aren't you tired or something?" he asked, all the while inwardly pleased that he was acting more like the Naruto he knew. "No," Naruto said flippantly. "I usually only sleep for 3 or 4 hours near dawn." Sasuke furrowed his eyebrows. Noting his confusion, Naruto explained. "Early morning, less likely to get attacked." "Do you get attacked a lot?" Sasuke asked. "Occasionally," he said, "more so since Akatsuki's revival. They come around once a week or so. I'm waiting for them to send someone stronger though. You would think they'd get that I'm not coming without being forced." Sasuke frowned but made no comment. "If you're tired, Sasuke, don't let me keep you up. I'll go train or something." It was said extremely casually. Sasuke looked at him quickly. "What?" Naruto asked. "Going to try and sneak off?" Blue eyes widened. "Naruto, I can't let you leave. Tsunade ordered it. What does that old hag know?" Naruto asked angrily, standing from his seat. "She doesn't want you caught by Akatsuki," Sasuke said, growing angry as well. "She wants to protect you, you ungrateful idiot. She wants to protect the village," Naruto snapped. "It's the fox she cares about, not Naruto. And she knows that it's better if I leave. Konoha is safer." "What?" Sasuke said, not understanding what the other man meant. "Nothing," Naruto said, turning. "I'm leaving. I didn't want to come back here and I sure as hell have no intention of staying." He stalked from the kitchen and towards the door. He stopped when Sasuke appeared in front of him, blocking his exit. "Get out of my way, Sasuke," Naruto growled. "I already told you, Dobi, I can't let you leave. I won't ask you again." Sasuke crossed his arms, unmoved. He was completely surprised when Naruto turned and sped towards the open window in his living room, leaping out. "Dobi," he yelled, following. Naruto was fast, Sasuke knew, but Sasuke was by no means slow. With a quick seal his eyes were red and he could see Naruto, not far ahead, heading towards the forest that surrounded the training grounds. With a leap he was on the rooftops trailing the navy blue blur in front of him. They made it from the rooftops to trees and with a burst of speed Sasuke caught up to the other man, grabbing the back of his shirt and yanking him back onto the tree limb before he could continue. With a surprised, "Oof," Naruto landed next to Sasuke. They glared at one another until Sasuke finally said, "You've gotten fast." "Cut the crap, Sasuke," Naruto said. "I want to get out of here before dawn." "I guess we'd better get started then," Sasuke said, dropping into his fighting stance. "I don't want to fight you," Naruto said. "Afraid?" Sasuke asked, smirking. "Not of you. For you. Confident aren't we?" Sasuke asked. "Some things never change," Naruto said, blue eyes twinkling for a moment, the only part of Naruto's face Sasuke could see since the man had pulled him mask back up. He dropped into his own stance. "Okay, Anbu Captain, let's go." They started quickly, flying at one another. Both were fast. Sasuke aimed a punch at Naruto's jaw and Naruto ducked, using his momentum to swing around, attempting to kick the Anbu's legs out from under him. Sasuke's Sharingan allowed him to dodge and he leapt to another tree limb in surprise as Naruto had pulled out several shuriken and sent them into the spot he had been standing on. Nothing would be accomplished fighting close range, Sasuke knew. They'd both continue blocking and dodging. Their fight earlier in the night had proved that. In that case, Sasuke muttered. His fingers flew into familiar seals. Gukaku no Jutsu. With a deep inhalation he sent a ball of flame at the other man and with wide eyes watched as Naruto didn't dodge. The fireball hit him full on and Sasuke watched anxiously as the smoke cleared, fearing he had hurt Naruto. He wanted to stop him, not kill him. He'd never expected Naruto not to dodge. As the smoke cleared, Naruto's figure became visible, still in his crouched position, head down and not looking at him. He stood, folding his arms over his chest. When Naruto met his gaze, Sasuke almost gasped. The red eyes of the Kyuubi were staring at him, but as he watched they slowly receded to the brilliant blue Sasuke knew. Naruto laughed. "Come on, Sasuke, is that all you've got?" "Your eyes," Sasuke said. Naruto winked at him. "Are we done yet? I'd like to get going." "You're not leaving," Sasuke yelled. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise at the normally stoic boy's outburst. "You can't do this. You can't come back after 10 years of being dead and leave again." "Sasuke, I won't let you leave again," Sasuke said. "When I left you came after me. I almost killed you, but for some reason, even when I was beyond hope, you believed in me. I've spent the past 10 years knowing that your death was my fault, that my decisions killed you. Now you're alive and I refuse to let you disappear again." Naruto looked away from him, and Sasuke couldn't tell if he'd gotten through to him or not. He nearly started in surprise when the blue eyes turned on him suddenly, glaring coldly. "How selfish," he said. "I don't want to be here. Why don't you understand that? I can't stay here. It's too dangerous. Besides, no one wants me here. I saw my funeral. I saw who went. More importantly, I saw who didn't. 3/4 of the village, Sasuke. 3/4 of the village celebrated my death." Even with the mask on, Sasuke could see the sneer on his face. "In Konoha, I'm Kyuubi. I'm a monster. A weapon to be used until I'm deemed too dangerous and sent on my merry way." He had to get Sasuke to let him leave, and if this was the only way, then so be it. "I hate this village and everyone in it. Including you." It was quiet for a long time before Sasuke finally spoke. "So why did you come back to warn us? If you hate us so much, why not just leave us to our destruction?" Naruto looked conflicted for a moment before settling on angry. He leapt at Sasuke and they resumed their dance of blocking and dodging. "I don't know what you are to the village," Sasuke grunted as they fought. "But to me, you're Naruto. My loud, blonde, doby." If Naruto heard him, he didn't respond, continuing his assault. It was only when Sasuke saw tears in his blue eyes did he realize Naruto had indeed heard his words. The tears distracted him, and Naruto finally managed to land a powerful punch, sending the Anbu flying off the tree branch and slamming his head painfully hard into the trunk of the tree behind him, before falling heavily to the ground, unconscious. Naruto stood on the limb in surprise. He wiped his eyes and jumped down from the tree, landing in a crouch next to Sasuke. His dark hair was splayed about the grass, contrasting with his pale skin. His breathing was wheezy, it sounded like perhaps he'd broken a rib. Naruto stood, turning his back on Sasuke and preparing to leap off into the trees. By the time Sasuke woke, he would have put enough distance between him and Konoha that he wouldn't be found. Sasuke awoke with a groan. Sunlight cut into his eyes like a knife the minute he'd opened them, and the headache he'd had upon waking intensified. His whole body hurt, his head and chest especially. He confusedly looked around his room, wondering how he got into his bed. He shot up into a sitting position, remembering the fight. Naruto obviously had won. Naruto. He had to catch up to him, try and get him back. Ignoring his pain, he tossed the covers aside, jumping out of bed. He hurriedly pulled his pants on and grabbed his shirt, running into the hallway. He never even saw the other person in front of him before he crashed into him, sending them both flying to the ground in a heap. It took Sasuke a moment to do anything, for the pain in his ribs became mind-shattering at the collision. Taking deep breaths, he finally lifted his head from the other man's chest. His dark eyes widened as he looked into blue eyes and a whiskered face. The blonde locks Sasuke knew he had were still under his Hide-8. "Naruto. Sasuke, with those special eyes of yours you would think you'd be able to look where you're going in your own house," Naruto said, raising his eyebrows in amusement. "I thought you were." "I was." Naruto looked to the side, suddenly finding the bottom of the wall to be extremely interesting. "But I couldn't just leave you unconscious in the forest." He turned back to Sasuke, whose face remained hovering over him, and smiled timidly. They stared at one another, Sasuke's upper body rising and falling as Naruto breathed. It was then Sasuke realized their close proximity and, flushing, he quickly removed himself. As soon as he sat up he hissed, his ribs protesting painfully at the movement. "You shouldn't jar yourself like that," Naruto chastised, sitting up as well. He stood before leaning over and helping Sasuke to his feet. The dark-haired man draped an arm over his abdomen, and it was then he noticed the bandages that had been wrapped around his torso. He looked questioningly at Naruto, who didn't meet his gaze as he helped Sasuke back to his room. When Sasuke was sitting on the edge of his bed, Naruto finally spoke. "Listen, I'm Sasuke-kun," a voice called out. Sasuke turned to see his former sensei crouching on his windowsill. His silver hair flew about as haphazardly as always and his one visible lazy eye was trained on him. Turning back to Naruto, he noticed the other man had somehow managed to pull up his mask, effectively hiding most of his face and the whiskers that would give him away. Sasuke sighed. Any talk they were about to have was over. "What, Kakashi?" he said, impatiently. Kakashi seemed to be amused, but of course, one never could tell when the only visible part of the Junin's face was his right eye. "Such disrespect for your elders," he said, shaking his head. "Tsunade-sama sent me to get you. An emergency meeting has been called to discuss new information she's received." His eye moved over to Naruto, who was leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed. "Who's your houseguest?" he asked. The quick glance Naruto shot him was enough for Sasuke to understand he didn't want his presence in Konoha known. "A temporary visitor. The Hokage asked me to let him stay while he is in Konoha." Kakashi wasn't quite satisfied with that answer. He saw the bandages the Anbu had on, and his sharp eye hadn't missed the look the mysterious man had given Sasuke. Also, why would a visitor be wearing the Konoha Hite 8? He decided to let it go for now, opting to say, "Welcome to Konoha." "I like your mask." "Arigato," the other replied with a slight bow. "Yours is very nice as well." Sasuke rolled his eyes. Kakashi's attention returned to Sasuke, who stood rather jerkily. He was obviously in a bit of pain. "I'll be there in a moment," he told the Junin, pulling on his shirt. There was an obvious note of dismissal in his tone. Kakashi nodded, hesitating. He wanted to know more about this house guest and Sasuke's injury. However, as much as he was loath to admit it, Sasuke was his superior. Because he was the younger man's former sensei, Kakashi could often get away with questioning him, but there were days his patience was not to be trifled with, and Kakashi could sense this was one of them. "I'll inform the Hokage," he told Sasuke before disappearing from the windowsill with one last glance at the masked man. When he was gone, Naruto spoke, but he left his mask in place, Sasuke noted. "He was certainly obedient, wasn't he?" "I outrank him," Sasuke said, slowly putting on his Anbu uniform. Naruto didn't speak again while Sasuke finished dressing. The dark-haired man turned to him suddenly, slipping on his black robes. "Are you going to try and leave again?" he asked, watching him unblinkingly. Naruto appeared thoughtful for a moment. "I suppose I should at least wait until you heal so you won't kill yourself coming after me in an injured condition," he finally said, his eyes crinkling in what was unmistakably a grin. Sasuke looked at him in surprise. He hadn't expected Naruto to cave so quickly, and he hadn't expected the other man would realize that if he tried to leave again Sasuke would follow. "You'll stay?" he finally said. "For now, yes. Only if you promise not to tell anyone else I'm here." Sasuke grunted in agreement, an action so like him Naruto nearly laughed. "I better not come back to find an empty house." "I'm not going anywhere, Sasuke, I promise." "I don't take back my words," he said. "That's my ninja way." "Who's at Sasuke's house?" Tsunade sighed, looking up at the Junin who'd just appeared in her office. She hadn't decided how to go about Naruto's return, but she and Jiraiya both agreed that the fewer people that knew the better. They knew Naruto would want to leave as soon as possible once this was over, and if everyone knew he was alive it would make it more than a little difficult for him. It was bad enough Sasuke knew. The young man had taken the news of Naruto's death extremely hard and they all knew he blamed himself. Now that he knew Naruto was alive, Tsunade wondered if he'd let him go easily. "Who did Sasuke say was at his house?" she asked carefully. If Kakashi didn't know, she certainly wasn't going to enlighten him. "A temporary visitor." "Yes," Tsunade said, going back to her paperwork. "That's who he is." "What's his name?" He's got a Konoha Hite 8. Should we know him? He's a temporary visitor, Kakashi. Just leave it at that. The Junin frowned, completely unsatisfied. There was a poof and Sasuke appeared, only recognizable by his fox Anbu mask. Sasuke. Tsunade nodded in acknowledgement. She looked around. Was he supposed to come? Sasuke asked. You left him alone? Tsunade said, standing quickly. He'll run. He's not going anywhere, Sasuke said firmly. How do you know? He gave me his word, Sasuke said. Tsunade stilled. A man's words should never be taken back. I won't take my words back. That is my ninja way. Fine, she said, taking her seat. Kakashi, although he remained silent, watched the exchange with great interest. Jiraiya walked into the office, ignoring the door and opting to use the hole Sasuke had made the night before. Tsunade, everyone's gathered for the meeting. Kakashi, having just appeared in her office, hadn't noticed the large gaping hole until then. What happened to your wall? Your former student and your crazy jutsu, Tsunade said, standing and walking to Jiraiya. Kakashi looked quickly at Sasuke, who stood with his arms crossed. His Anbu mask made him look anything but repentant. Sasuke had used Chidori last night? What was going on? Come on, Jiraiya said, stepping back through the hole. Sasuke moved to follow, saying nothing and grimacing behind his mask as his ribs ached. Hold on, Tsunade said, raising a hand. Sasuke, come here. The Anbu walked slowly to her. When he stood in front of her she frowned. Take off your robes. Jiraiya and Kakashi watched in confusion. Sasuke took off his robes, revealing the standard Anbu uniform, a silver-colored sleeveless shirt over top a high-necked black one and black pants. Black arm protectors were pulled up to his biceps, leaving just enough of his arm exposed to show the Anbu tattoo. Sasuke didn't remove his mask. Lifting his shirts, Tsunade looked at the bandages. What happened? She asked, placing her hand lightly on his wrapped torso. We had a spar, was his answer. The hesitation wasn't missed by anyone in the room. Rough spar, Tsunade commented. He broke 2 of your ribs. Kakashi's eyebrow rose. So that man had injured Sasuke. Getting hurt was a rare occurrence for Sasuke since the emergence of the third wheel of his Sharingan. Tsunade and Jiraiya looked grim. Sasuke said nothing. Tsunade's hand began to glow and Sasuke could feel the warmth of her chakra. When the glow stopped, the pain was gone. After pulling his robes back on, Sasuke bowed. Arigato, Tsunade-sama. She nodded and they made their way out of the office, heading to the meeting. Kakashi followed, watching Sasuke, now more curious than ever. Naruto wondered what Sasuke did in his free time. His house was scarcely furnished, there was no TV to speak of, and the house was immaculate almost to the point that it felt unlived in, so it wasn't even like he could clean to pass the time. But Naruto knew Sasuke, at least, he had 10 years before, and it wasn't far-fetched to assume that all of his free time was spent training. Training was never a bad idea, Naruto concluded, and, after making sure his hair and face were covered, he made his way to the training grounds across rooftops. The only indication that he was moving was the faint breeze the villagers felt as he passed. He landed soundlessly on the grass at the training grounds, looking around. It wasn't much different from the years before. Yelling drew his attention to the far end of the field. I will not let you have him, forehead girl. A blonde woman with her hair pulled into a high ponytail screamed. Ino wore the exact same thing she did when she was younger, but she had a Chunin vest on. Shut up, Ino pig, he'd never love you. Naruto nearly groaned. They were still fighting over Sasuke? Did they not get his complete lack of interest in anyone? Then again, he thought with a frown, it had been 10 years. Maybe Sasuke was interested in one of them. Or someone else. He knew nothing of the raven-haired man's life. Naruto almost fell over at the next words from the women. Lee is mine, Ino pig. Sakura still looked the same. She'd grown her pink hair long again after Sasuke had left Konoha when they were 12, and it cascaded down to the small of her back now, same as it had when they were 16. Her attire was different. She still wore a sleeveless dress, similar in style to her old one, but it was a deep navy blue and went well with the Chunin vest she wore over top of it. He smiled at the sight of the vest, he was glad for her. But they were fighting over Lee? Ino paused at Sakura's words. Lee? I don't want Lee, but I won't let you have Shikamaru. Naruto had to physically bite his lip to stop himself from laughing. Shikamaru? Why would I want that lazy Junin? Ino sighed, twisting a strand of her hair from her long ponytail around a finger. Sakura, this doesn't work when we're not fighting over the same guy. The strawberry-haired girl laughed. You're right, let's just spar. Naruto watched the women fight. They used mostly taijutsu, but occasionally they would use basic techniques, replacements or clones. Sakura's skills had improved since he'd last seen her. She was excellent at using the clones and replacements to get in close to Ino and attack. Ino, however, had wonderful reaction time and managed to slash the pink-haired woman's arm with a kunai. Naruto was surprised they were getting so vicious. Leaping back, Sakura pulled out several shuriken and sent them flying at Ino, who dodged, but was taken by surprise when Sakura followed the throwing stars, coming at her with a kunai. Using her kunai to block, they remained clashed, struggling against one another. Finally Ino ducked, kicking her foot out and swiping Sakura's legs from under her. Sakura landed on her back with a loud thump. That hurt, Ino pig, Sakura said from the ground. Naruto watched her sit up and place a glowing hand onto her slashed arm, healing it. So Tsunade must have continued with her training. Ino shrugged. You're the one who wanted to work on your inside guard, forehead girl. Yeah, let's try again, Sakura said, rolling her eyes and looking away. It was then her eyes fell on Naruto and she started in surprise. Hello, she called, waving him over. Naruto thought about running away, but even he could see how suspicious a stranger running off would look. Shoving his hands into his pockets he walked over to the two women. Hey, he said, nodding at them. Ino walked over and stood next to Sakura. Naruto raised an eyebrow as the blonde gave him a once-over. Do you need the training grounds? Sakura asked, staring into his brilliant blue eyes. They were so much like. No, I was just going to work over there, he said, jabbing a thumb over his shoulder. So you were being a hentai and watching two sweaty women fight it out? Ino asked, grinning. Ino, Sakura said, while Naruto spluttered. Ignore her, she said to him. I don't think I've seen you around before. I'm just visiting for a bit, Naruto said. But you have a Konoha Hite 8, Ino pointed out. Naruto shrugged. I travel a lot. Sakura and Ino exchanged glances but made no comment. So do you want to spar with us? Sakura asked. Oh, no, What level are you? Ino asked, noticing he had no vest to distinguish his skill level. Naruto paused. What level was he indeed? Well, technically, I'm a chunin. He wondered vaguely what had happened to his vest after he'd left. Perfect, Sakura said. We'll be evenly matched. No, I don't think. What's the matter? Ino asked. Afraid you'll be beaten by two girls? Naruto smiled. Much about him may have changed in the past 10 years, but his competitive nature had never completely diminished. Alright, let's go. The women backed off and Naruto found himself between them. One could consider 2-on-1 unfair, but Naruto knew at this point he was definitely higher than the Chunin level. Okay, Sakura, let's go, Ino said, raising her arms. One hand was fisted and pulled close to her for a guard. The other was open, her palm facing him. Right, Sakura said, dropping into her fighting stance. Naruto remained relaxed. You ladies done encouraging each other? He was standing sideways in order to keep them both in his line of vision. They both growled and ran towards him, remarkably similar. They seemed to be able to gauge one another's thoughts, for as Sakura aimed a punch for his face, Ino lowered herself to kick his legs out from under him. He blocked the punch with his left arm and leapt above Ino's legs. He flipped away, placing both women in front of him. They were both surprised. They'd expected to at least connect one hit. With an almost imperceptible nod to one another they went at him again, opting to attack with speed. They did outnumber him, so he wouldn't be able to block everything they threw at him. They rushed him, using quick combos that he simply blocked, using one hand per woman. His speed and reflexes were amazing and Sakura had to duck and roll away when he freed himself from Ino's attack and decided to attack her. Using his distraction with Sakura to her advantage, Ino planted her right foot into the ground, spinning and aiming a devastating roundhouse kick to his abdomen. She and Sakura could only blink when he turned and caught her by the ankle, using her momentum to spin her and toss her away into Sakura. They both hit the ground painfully. Groaning, Ino sat up, and Sakura pushed the blonde off her lap. He's too fast, Ino panted, rubbing her ankle. He might even be Sasuke-kun's speed. They looked over to the man, who was waiting for them to get up. He's not even winded, Ino said. Sakura nodded, wiping the sweat from her face, leaving a dirt smudge across her cheek. We need a way to slow him down, she said. Give up? He called to them. Leave it to me, Ino said with a grin, struggling to her feet. We'll need a distraction though. Sakura smiled. I'll see what I can do. Naruto watched them closely. It seemed they'd stopped underestimating him and had begun to plan something. Sakura suddenly ran at him, pulling out 2 kunai. Whoa, getting serious are we? He said. She leapt into the air, tossing 1 kunai at him. He jumped away, keeping his eyes on her as she flew over his head, ready to throw other kunai. He kept his back to Ino, for he didn't sense her coming closer. What he failed to notice was the blonde on her knees, her fingers ready in a seal. When Ino slumped forward and the man stilled, Sakura cheered. Landing gracefully on the grass, she pocketed her kunai and pulled out some rope. Now to tie the guy up. Something wasn't right. Ino watched as thousands of images, presumably the man's memories, blurred past her too fast for her to see. Abruptly, the colors stopped and she was left in darkness. What was going on? Why didn't she have control over his body? She was beginning to panic. She couldn't see anything, and without the use of the man's fingers she couldn't return to her body. Suddenly, a low breathing filled her hearing. She whirled around, heartbeat quickening. Who's there? There was a clicking noise, reminiscent to a cat's claws on tile as it prowled the kitchen. Her breaths were fast now. Are you afraid? A deep voice asked from the darkness. She trembled. The voice seemed to come from every direction at once. Who are you? She asked firmly, ignoring her shaking hands. Ino, a gentle voice said. She whipped around to see the man she was fighting. He was all she could see, everything else remained black. What's going on? She asked. You shouldn't be here, he said. As she watched, the darkness behind him began to glow and suddenly there were 2 huge fiery eyes behind them, their burning gaze directed at her. She backed away in fear, biting back a scream. Foolish girl, the first voice said. You can't possess the possessed. With that she felt a horrible jolt, and her consciousness flew back to her own body. Sakura looked at her in surprise. She was just moving to tie him up. Ino scrambled backwards, trying to distance herself from the man, who was shaking himself from a daze. What are you? She whispered. Sakura gaped at her, rope hanging loosely in her hands. The man's soft blue eyes met her frightened gaze, his expression unreadable under the mask. Thanks for the spar, he finally said. I need to get going. Ino and Sakura watched him walk away, before leaping into the trees and out of their sight. What was that all about? Sakura asked. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Naruto berated himself, heading back to Sasuke's. How could I forget that crazy skill of Ino's? He didn't know who knew about Kyuubi. Maybe after his death, it had become common knowledge? If that was the case, it wouldn't take long for Ino to figure out who he was, especially if she got Sakura's opinion. Alighting on Sasuke's roof, he leapt down and into an open living room window. Sasuke was pacing the living room. His robes were draped over the couch and his fox mask was tossed in the armchair next to it. How was the meeting? Naruto asked. Sasuke turned towards him, looking angry. Naruto stepped back towards the window, ready to make an escape if needed. Where were you? I went training, Naruto responded. I didn't know I was confined to the house. Sasuke seemed to calm down. Sorry, he mumbled. Sasuke, I told you, I'm not going anywhere yet. Sasuke nodded and began to walk towards the kitchen. Sasuke, Naruto said, calling the other man's attention back to him. Who from our generation knows that? He wasn't sure how to phrase the question. Kyuubi, he finally said. Sasuke frowned at him. Only me and Shikamaru, as far as I know. Shikamaru? Sasuke had seen it enough times to put 2 and 2 together. But how would Shikamaru know? He was your commanding officer enough that it was information he needed to be aware of. Naruto nodded, thinking, so no one else knows? Not even Sakura? Sasuke shook his head. We were forbidden to talk about it, even after your death. Why? He watched Naruto suspiciously, trying to gauge what he was thinking. No reason, Naruto said cheerfully. Just wondering. Can we eat lunch? He walked past Sasuke and into the kitchen. Sasuke stared after him, finally following him. Naruto was balancing on the back 2 legs of his chair when Sasuke walked into the kitchen. You seem better, Naruto commented, watching him move with ease. Tsunade, Sasuke grunted as an explanation. Sasuke-kun, a familiar feminine voice rang through the house. Shit, Naruto said, startled to hear her. He lost his balance and fell backwards, landing in a clatter on the floor. Sasuke rolled his eyes at Naruto before looking into the living room to see Sakura standing by the open window. Why did ninjas ignore the door? He needed to start locking his windows. Sasuke-kun, Sakura said, seeing him. There's a weird guy in the village, she said, walking towards him. He's very suspicious and Ino says there's something in. There was a groan and Sakura paused, looking towards the floor where Naruto was pulling himself into a sitting position. She gasped. You, she said, what are you doing here? Are you trying to kill Sasuke? Naruto stood and twisted his neck, cracking it with a loud pop. Both Sasuke and Sakura flinched. Righting the chair, he sat down, looking up at them. Catching from Naruto's expression that he wasn't going to be much use in this conversation, Sasuke spoke up. Sakura, he's staying with me for a while. What? Sakura asked, dumbfounded. There was a pause. Sasuke-kun, can I talk to you for a minute? Sasuke looked at Naruto, who appeared to be feigning innocence under his mask. With a sigh he followed Sakura into the living room. Naruto could hear them talking in low tones. A few minutes later he heard the sound of the door and when Sasuke returned to the kitchen he was alone. So that's why you wanted to know if anyone knew about Kyuubi. Naruto shrugged. You apparently scared the shit out of Ino, Sasuke told him. Maybe next time she'll think twice about poking around in people's heads. Naruto, Sasuke paused. Last night, when you didn't dodge the Gukaku no Jutsu. What happened? Naruto looked up. What does it look like? He asked, sounding genuinely curious. What? Sasuke asked. When Kyuubi surfaces. I've never seen myself. So it was Kyuubi. What brought him out? He's a firefox, Naruto said with an air of the obvious. Fire calls him out. I'll never need to dodge it, because fire is my element. But, Sasuke said, if fire brings him out, wouldn't you want to dodge? To keep him in? He never comes out to stay in battle. But what if he tries to? He has. I don't let him, Naruto said. Besides, he knows if he tries to come out I'll fight him, and if that happens during battle it's likely I'll get killed. He shares my death, and is intelligent enough not to distract me in a battle. You have control over him? Sasuke asked. Naruto snorted, stretching his arms over his cloth-covered head. I would never be so bold as to claim I have control over Kyuubi. Especially, he stopped abruptly, closing his eyes. Especially what? Sasuke pressed. Naruto became still and tense, not answering him. Sasuke wasn't even sure he had heard him. Naruto? Trying to prove a point? Naruto muttered, and with a foreboding feeling in the pit of his stomach Sasuke wondered if he was even talking to him. Naruto stood abruptly, knocking the chair away in the process. Sasuke felt a sudden burst of power from the other man. Naruto's hands clutched his head and he began to grind his teeth. Sasuke took a step towards him, but stopped as red chakra flared up, warning him to stay away. Sasuke watched wide-eyed as Naruto doubled over as if he'd been punched in the stomach and opened his eyes. The regularly sky-blue eyes were now a violent purple, flashing now and then between their normal color and a fiery red. Naruto, Sasuke said, stepping closer. Stay back. Naruto, or perhaps Kyuubi, cried. Sasuke did as he was told. Bastard, fox, Naruto growled through clenched teeth. Go back where you belong. With a rush of air the red chakra was suddenly pulled inside Naruto, the force sending him flying forward into Sasuke. Sasuke was only able to catch the other man and use his body to soften the fall they were about to take. He landed with a thud on his back, arms around Naruto as they slid across the kitchen floor. For a moment they both lay still, Naruto panting quietly against Sasuke's chest. What was that? Sasuke finally asked, making no attempt to move. That, Naruto said, still struggling for breath, is the reason I've been pretending to be dead for 10 years. 10 years earlier, Tsunade sadly ran her hand through the brilliant blonde locks of the 15-year-old boy lying still in his hospital bed. In the room next door lay another boy, who was being watched over by a pink-haired girl, whose expression was similar to Tsunade's as she ran her fingers through jet black hair. 2 days ago the boys had finally come to clash after their only real fight 3 years before. Their first fight had ended in disaster, leaving the blonde injured and unconscious and the dark-haired boy a missing nin. For 3 years they trained and no one but their sensei, two of the three legendary Sannin, knew the extent of their powers. Konoha had been on alert for years, ever since Orochimaru's first attack on the village. Naruto and Jiraiya had returned to the village only a week before Orochimaru's giant snakes invaded and sound ninjas attacked. The first reports of the attack came to Tsunade when she was in a meeting with Naruto, discussing his training. Genma had teleported into her office, a toothpick dangling precariously from his mouth as he explained that two of their gates had been broken through. She ordered him to tell the Chunin that their first priority was to get the villagers to safety and to have the Junin fend off those at the gates. Genma had only left moments before the Hokage tower began to shake. Naruto. Tsunade had called as the building moved precariously. Her first instinct was to protect the boy. The 15-year-old moved from position in front of the desk, in a flash, grabbing her and leaping out of the window as the tower collapsed. Setting her to her feet, they watched the tower fall, clouds of smoke rising as the rubble hit the ground. Tsunade, Naruto, Jiraiya called, running to their sides. They could hear the laugh before they could see the man. The coo that they would recognize anywhere. A giant snake slithered into view, tail wrapped around what used to be the base of the tower, the end flicking carelessly. Two ninjas stood on its head. As the smoke cleared they could see them clearly. The taller of the two had white hair, although his face was still quite young. The glare of the sun off his glasses hid his eyes from view, but they all recognized Kabuto. The shorter figure laughed again. It's been a while, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Naruto. It was Sasuke's face, Sasuke's body, but the gravely voice emanating from his lips, that was Orochimaru's voice. Naruto hung his head, clenching his fists. He was too late. Tsunade-sama, a voice called. 5 Anbu were suddenly between her and Orochimaru. Go, she said. I don't need your protection, help the villagers. The Anbu hesitated before bowing quickly and heading into various parts of the village. Let's end this, Orochimaru. Jiraiya called. Yes, Orochimaru said. It's finally time. Tsunade tensed for battle. She'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Naruto, stay back, she said, cracking her knuckles. Not a chance in hell. Tsunade Baba, he growled. Naruto, you can't fight him, she cried. Tsunade, Jiraiya's rough voice cut in. Let him fight. Jiraiya, he could be killed. Tsunade, the white-haired man said angrily. He won't be fighting alone. She sighed. Be careful, Naruto. Don't worry, the blonde growled. Tsunade-sama, a smooth voice said. Kabuto stood in front of them, a good 20 feet away. While I would prefer to fight Naruto-kun, to repay him for our last meeting, Orochimaru-sama has requested that I fight you. Tsunade looked at Naruto, expecting him to say something very loud and very brash to Kabuto, and was surprised to see him standing with his arms crossed, watching him with an expression that bordered on disinterest. His 3 years of training had certainly calmed him down, she thought. I still owe you for our last fight, Tsunade said to him. Your cheap tricks with blood aren't going to work this time. She rushed at him, and their fight began. Well, Jiraiya, I guess it's our turn, Orochimaru said through Sasuke's mouth. Angrily, Jiraiya bit his thumb, drawing blood. Recognizing the seals he began to perform, Naruto placed a hand on the older man's arm. Arrow Sennin, if you summon Gamma Bunta, half of the village will be destroyed before the fight is over. Coo, came the laugh from above them. Looks like the brat's lost some of his brashness over the years. Both Naruto and Jiraiya glared up at him. Orochimaru, Naruto cried. I swear I will kill you before the day is over. He laughed again. Not much smarter though, is he? Naruto and Jiraiya suddenly attacked, the boy leaping to a building and onto the snake's head while Jiraiya ran up the snake's body, using chakra to stick to the snake's scaly skin. Orochimaru attacked with his tongue, a sight that almost made Naruto sick as it flew from Sasuke's mouth. Naruto ignored the feeling and flipped away from the tongue, which moved in an arc towards Jiraiya. The wild-haired man dodged. He looked towards Sasuke's, no, Orochimaru's bandaged arms. If he could just get in close. The tongue was too long to allow for close-range fighting. Naruto, he called. After 3 years of training together, the boy knew what he wanted and quickly executed. Kage Bushin no Jutsu. 50 Narutos suddenly surrounded Orochimaru, and with a loud battle cry in unison they all rushed him. Orochimaru laughed as he fought them off with his tongue. Still weak, he said, watching them poof into smoke. His eyes widened in surprise as one Naruto managed to dodge his tongue and get in close, a kunai in his hand. What? He said in surprise, as with a poof of smoke the orange-clad boy became Jiraiya. A hench? Orochimaru said. Raising the kunai, Jiraiya lunged at Orochimaru. Jiraiya's big mistake was assuming his arms were still useless. He looked in shock as Sasuke's face twisted into a manic grin. Orochimaru grabbed Jiraiya's wrist, stopping the kunai inches from his face. Still as stupid as ever, Jiraiya. Jiraiya tried to pull his arm away, but Orochimaru held him fast. With wide eyes Jiraiya watched as Orochimaru began concentrating his chakra to his left hand. Naruto knew that skill. Haku's face suddenly came to him. Do you have someone who is important to you? Arrow Sennin, he cried, taking off as Orochimaru's fist flew forward. It happened so quickly no one reacted for a long moment. Sakura had been looking for a place that she would be most useful. She no longer had her genin team since Sasuke had run off and Naruto had been training. She herself had been training as well for the past 3 years under Tsunade-sama's guidance. Now she wanted to do what she could as a medical nin, although her skills were not as highly developed as Tsunade-sama's or Shizune's. Leaping onto a roof to get a better view of the chaos, she attempted to see who was in most immediate need of help. She was not prepared for the sight before her. A loud scream of, "Naruto!" broke the silence that had descended over Jiraiya and Orochimaru. Sakura stood on the roof next to them, gaping open-mouthed and horrified. Sasuke was standing on the head of a giant snake, holding Jiraiya-san's wrist immobile with one hand, his other hand thrust through Naruto's right shoulder. Naruto coughed, blood spraying on Sasuke's white-wrapped arms. Sasuke seemed to recover from the surprise and started laughing. What was wrong with his voice? Jiraiya stared at the hand in front of him. The hand that had gone straight through Naruto's chest. The hand that was meant for him. Blood dripped from Orochimaru's fingers and down the orange jacket. Releasing Jiraiya's hand, Orochimaru braced his free hand on the boy's chest, unceremoniously pulling his fist out of him. Jiraiya caught Naruto as he crumpled. "Naruto!" Tsunade cried from the ground. She went to rush for him, but was blocked by Kabuto. "You're not done here, Tsunade-sama. Get out of my way!" She screamed, but was forced to dodge as he concentrated his chakra to his hands and lunged, trying to cut her muscles. "You okay, Arrow Sennin?" the boy in Jiraiya's arms asked in a soft voice. He coughed up some more blood. How he could even talk was beyond the older man. "Naruto, you baka, why did you do that?" Jiraiya asked, eyes wide in horror. "I don't want to watch those dear to me die before my eyes." Neither of them noticed the flash in Orochimaru's eyes at the words. He shook his head as if to clear it. Naruto slipped from consciousness and Orochimaru began to laugh. "It seems like all your students end up dying, Jiraiya." Jiraiya's hands began to shake in anger. He leapt to the roof Sakura stood on and gently lay Naruto down, then turned and leapt back to the snake's head, preparing to end this. "My host doesn't seem too pleased with me," Orochimaru said in amusement. "There's quite a stir in the back corner of my mind where his consciousness lays." "He's still within you?" Jiraiya asked in surprise. "Don't get any sentimental ideas, Jiraiya. He's trapped in there forever." Jiraiya sighed. So there was no way to save Sasuke. He would have died trying if there was. Naruto would have wanted it. "Sharingan," Orochimaru said. Jiraiya grit his teeth as red eyes glared at him. On the roof tears streamed down Sakura's face as she used all that Tsunade had ever taught her to try and save Naruto. He wasn't dead yet, but the wound, the blood. She could feel his heart slowing as she worked, her hands glowing with chakra. "Naruto, please hang on." There were loud crashes and she looked up, watching with wide eyes as Sasuke and Jiraiya-san sent jutsu after jutsu at one another. She had never seen a battle with such skills, not even the battle of Kakashi and Zabuza compared. The slowing heartbeat under her fingers suddenly stopped. "Naruto." She sent more chakra into him, desperately trying to restart his heart. "No," she sobbed, trying again and again. An explosion rattled the building she was on, and standing up quickly she saw that Sasuke had thrown Jiraiya-san with such a force he'd crashed into building, shaking it before the older man fell motionlessly to the ground. Tsunade was still fighting off Kabuto, although she now had a profound limp. Smoke was rising from everywhere in the village. Buildings collapsing were punctuated by screams, and from where she stood on the roof she could see the bodies and blood littering the ground. She stared down at the blood coating her hands, then moved her gaze to Naruto, who lay motionlessly on the ground. She had failed. Clenching her hands into angry fists, she turned to face Sasuke, who had begun to laugh as he looked over the destruction of Konoha. After kneeling and kissing Naruto on his forehead, she stood back up, pulling a kunai from the pouch on her thigh. She wasn't strong enough, she knew. Sasuke had beaten Jiraiya-san, but she had to do something. Even if it killed her, she would not run away. Deep inside a dying boy, two great red eyes peered out of the darkness. "Oh, no," the owner of the eyes said, almost amused. "This simply won't do. One day you're going to regret this, kid." The boy's heart had slowed so that it appeared to have stopped, but Kyuubi knew better. This kid lived on willpower alone, but that was enough. With red chakras swirling around the blonde boy's body, the hole in his shoulder began to repair, just as it had 3 years before. "Sasuke-kun," Sakura screamed. The raven-haired boy looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "You killed him. You killed Naruto." Sasuke laughed that frightening laugh. "So he finally died." As Sakura watched, his eyes widened and flashed and his hands flew to his head as if he were in pain. Suddenly he stopped and straightened, a manic grin on his face. "Oh my, you are angry indeed. What was he to you?" he said. Sakura was confused. It didn't seem as though Sasuke was talking to her. "Sasuke, you're a traitor. I can never forgive you," she cried, raising her kunai. Tsunade finally managed to get a chakra-filled punch directly to Kabuto's chest. Sending her chakra to specific points in his body, she was able to knock him unconscious. He wouldn't wake up for at least a week. Taking a moment to look around, she noted the critical situation. She almost stopped breathing when she saw Sakura arm herself. "Sakura," she cried. "No, that's not Sasuke, you cannot defeat him." The pink-haired girl either didn't hear her or ignored her, and rushed at Orochimaru. "Don't kid yourself, girl," Orochimaru said, waiting until she was close and backhanding her away. She flew with the sheer force of the hit, falling off the snake's head. "Sakura!" Tsunade yelled as she watched her apprentice begin to fall from 50 feet in the air. She couldn't make it to her in time, she could barely walk. A blur of orange and red whizzed by her, leaping into the air, catching the young woman in mid-fall. Tsunade stared in amazement as Naruto suddenly stood before her, placing Sakura, who had passed out, gently on the ground. He sped away, returning a few moments later with the limp Jiraiya over his shoulder, setting him next to Sakura. Tsunade couldn't speak. Naruto's horrible wound was gone. The only indication it had ever been there was the large rip in his jacket. He was surrounded by red chakra and his features had taken on the look of a fox. His eyes were red and narrowed, his teeth long and fang-like, and his nails had lengthened into claws. "Heal them, Tsunade Baba. I'll take care of this." "Naruto," she called as he walked away. "I'll be okay," he said, glancing back at her over his shoulder, sending her a vicious grin. She sighed, looking at Jiraiya's beaten form. Laying her palms on his chest, she began to heal him, keeping her eyes on Naruto. The boy leapt back up to the snake's head, staring down Orochimaru with his arms crossed. "So, you're not dead? Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Naruto growled. "The fox has emerged. At least now you'll be a fun fight." Orochimaru laughed, and then paused, a faraway look in his eyes. "Your friend seems to want you to run away. He seems quite attached to you. Got very emotional when you were announced dead." The news of Sasuke's consciousness had been shared to shock and surprise Naruto, and hopefully to weaken him. He wouldn't hurt Sasuke's body if he thought there was a chance the boy could be returned to it. So when Naruto heard this and his lips twisted into a feral grin, fangs showing menacingly, Orochimaru was surprised, to say the least. "You can tell him that he should know by now that Uzumaki Naruto never runs away. I'm still weak from having his hand rammed through my chest and I'm spending most of my energy right now trying to stop Kyuubi from taking over my body and killing everyone that isn't dead already. So if he'd really like for me not to die, he'd better reclaim his body, because I'm not going to win, but I sure as hell am not going to run." "Ku, Orochimaru laughed. "Well, at least you're realistic," he said. "You aren't going to win." He began powering up the Chidori, This seems like a fitting way for you to die. It'll be as if it really is Sasuke ramming his hand through your heart." Naruto said nothing. Jiraiya awoke to see Tsunade hovering over him worriedly. "Naruto," he gasped, sitting up. He's alive, Jiraiya," Tsunade said quickly, pointing up to where the two possessed boys stood. They watched Orochimaru power up Chidori and begin to run at Naruto, who stood firm, his arms still crossed. "He's not dodging," Tsunade said with a gasp. Jiraiya tried to get up to go to him but he was too weak and couldn't stand. "Naruto! Dodge!" he screamed, from his knees. But Naruto didn't move. Orochimaru drew closer and Tsunade and Jiraiya watched in amazement as the Chidori suddenly went out like a candle being snuffed. Orochimaru fell to his knees, hands gripping Sasuke's hair. A loud scream wrenched from his lips. "This can't be happening," he cried. Then his voice changed to a different tone. No more gentle, but there was a younger, less gravelly quality to it. It was a voice Naruto knew well, slightly deeper than the last time he heard it, but it was the same voice. "Get out of my body," he screamed. There was a surge of power and a scream of outrage, and as they watched the chakras swirl up around Sasuke's body they could suddenly see the shadowy shape of a human being pulled from the boy's chest. It appeared to be trying to hold on, but it was thrust from his body and disappeared. Sasuke fell forward, to all fours, panting. The raven-haired boy looked up, red eyes having returned to their normal deep gray. He saw the blonde standing above him, surrounded by red chakra. "Naruto?" he said. With what looked like considerable trouble the blonde managed to stop the red chakra, and when he opened his eyes again they were the bright blue Sasuke was used to. Naruto smiled down at him. "Sasuke," he said, "I knew you could do it." With that he collapsed, no longer able to remain standing without the strength of the Kyuubi. Sasuke moved swiftly, with energy he didn't know he had left, to catch the boy as he fell, cradling him gently. "Naruto?" he said, shaking him lightly. "Naruto." Without his summoner the snake they stood on grew impatient, and with a poof it was gone. With nothing under his feet Sasuke quickly jumped to the roof next to him before leaping to the ground. He was unable to go any further and he sat down heavily, still holding the blonde close, rocking back and forth. When Tsunade and Jiraiya reached him he was crying, mumbling, "Gomen Nasai, Gomen Nasai," into Naruto's hair. It took a sleep jutsu before he would relinquish his hold on the boy. 3 days later Naruto awoke in the hospital. No one was aware of his condition except for Tsunade and Jiraiya, not even Kakashi or Iruka, who came by every day only to be told they could be given no information about either of their former students. Sasuke was still unconscious, his body needing time to recover from the strain being possessed had put on it. Orochimaru was assumed dead, his soul having nowhere to go once Sasuke had vanquished him. When Naruto had woken Tsunade had hugged him tightly, relieved he was all right. She let him go when he didn't hug back. "Tsunade Baba," he said softly, staring at his hands. It almost took over that time. "Naruto?" she said, worriedly. "Kyuubi," he said, and then paused. "I've never been that close to losing myself. The killing intent, the power. If I had given in for even an instant everyone in the village would be dead. I almost couldn't stop him. But you did, Naruto, you stopped him. He's been trying more often," the boy said. What? I can constantly feel him poking in my consciousness. He's waits, Tsunade, waits until I'm relaxed, until I'm off guard, usually when I'm sleeping. Then he tries to take over. He wants out." Tsunade was shocked at the information. Why hadn't Naruto ever told her? She swallowed. This was a difficult development. "You can fight him, Naruto," she finally said. "What happens if I can't? I can't take that chance. When he saved my life he told me I'd regret it. I can feel him already, Tsunade. He took that opportunity when I was weakest, and wove himself deeper into me. He's just right beneath the surface now. He's trying to meld us." Tsunade didn't know what to say. She was the Hokage but she had no idea what to do. This was a problem where no answers seemed apparent. Naruto continued, "I have to leave the village." "What?" Tsunade cried. "I can't be here if Kyuubi manages to take over. I will not put people I care about at risk." "Naruto, if you leave, you'll be considered a missing nin," Tsunade told him. "There's got to be a way, Tsunade Baba," he said. He pleaded. In the end it was Jiraiya that came up with the idea to tell everyone Naruto was dead. No one knew his condition, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say he died from his injuries. The older man had wanted to go with the boy, but Naruto had refused. Both Sannin wondered how he planned to conceal himself, for his looks caused him to stick out quite a bit. But he tied his hite over his telltale blonde locks and pulled a mask over his wicker marks, so his only defining feature left was his blue eyes, which didn't seem to shine as they once had. When he appeared before them one last time, his face and hair covered and wearing navy blue and black colors rather than his normal bright orange jumpsuit, they sadly had to admit he was not easily recognizable. Before he left, he had turned to Tsunade. "Tsunade-sama," he said. The respectfulness of his voice and the name left both Sannin wide-eyed. "Don't punish Sasuke. Please." There was nothing she could say but, "I won't." Then, with a nod and a wave, he was gone and Tsunade had to go inform everyone who cared about him of his death. Sasuke rolled over again, laying on his back and glaring up at the ceiling of his room as if it was the reason he was unable to sleep. He'd been so close to getting the answers he'd been searching for since Naruto's return. "That is the reason I've been pretending to be dead for 10 years. Naruto had been about to go on, when there was a loud knock at Sasuke's door. Immediately, Naruto clammed up. Sasuke could feel the difference. Pulling himself into a sitting position, Naruto stood. Offering his hand to Sasuke, he pulled the dark-haired man to his feet. The knocking became more insistent. "Uchiha-san," they could hear from the other side of the door. Without a glance back at Sasuke, Naruto made his way out of the kitchen and down the hallway of Sasuke's one-story house. Sasuke watched him disappear into the guest room across from his room with a sigh. Stalking to the door, he pulled it open with more force than he meant to, glaring icily at the visitor. Two Junin stood on his doorstep. Sasuke was unfamiliar with the one who had been knocking and calling his name. He was young, maybe 20. The Junin behind him stood a few feet away, a distinct look of disinterest on his face. Shino, Sasuke thought, was the only other man he knew whose expression could remain as impassive and indifferent as his own. Actually, he amended, Shino was probably better at it than he was, since Sasuke's expression could usually vary to angry and, on occasion, surprised. Shino rarely even twitched an agitated eyebrow. He stood now with his hands stuffed into his pockets, round sunglasses over his eyes. "Uchiha-san," the first Junin said. "We were patrolling and we felt a large surge of chakra from your house. We wanted to be sure everything was alright." Sasuke almost snorted in amusement. The young Junin looked extremely anxious and Shino looked anything but concerned. He actually looked bored. "Everything's fine," Sasuke said, sending a look of annoyance at the Junin. He paused. "Practicing Chidori. In your house?" the young man asked. He had heard tales of Chidori's destructive power. Sasuke knew the lie was pretty bad when he saw Shino make the effort to raise an eyebrow. Deciding the best route to follow was the one that worked most often, he crossed his arms and glared at both of them. "Why is it suddenly your business what I do in my own house?" The young Junin looked horrified to have pissed the Anbu off. He stuttered out his next words. "We just wanted to be sure nothing had happened, sir." "I think," Sasuke sneered, "that I am more than qualified to take care of myself, don't you?" "Yes, sir," the Junin stammered. Shino spoke, surprising them both. "Sorry to bother you, Uchiha." He turned and walked away, and the young Junin took one look at Sasuke and quickly made his way after him. With a shake of his head, Sasuke closed the door and went in search of Naruto. As he headed down the hall towards the guest room, he passed the bathroom, and, hearing the gentle thrum of the shower, he realized he wouldn't get to talk to him until later. But when later came, Naruto brushed off the entire incident. He either ignored or changed the subject whenever Sasuke tried to bring it up, which was why Sasuke was now tossing in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. Heaving a frustrated sigh, Sasuke threw off the covers and climbed out of bed. He didn't flinch as his bare feet came into contact with the cool wooden floor, used to the feeling after so many years. He only slept in his shorts and didn't bother putting on a shirt as he padded out of his bedroom. He wasn't even sure where he was going, but he knew tossing in bed was getting him nowhere. As he walked by the guest room Naruto inhabited, he couldn't help but notice the faint light glowing under the door. Pausing, he listened carefully but could hear nothing to indicate Naruto was awake. The door wasn't shut completely and Sasuke debated pushing it open slightly to see if Naruto was sleeping. He knew he could just knock, but he didn't want to wake him if Naruto was asleep. At least one of them should get some rest. Finally, he gave in, quietly pushing the door open just wide enough that he could peer in. Naruto sat in the middle of the floor, his back to the door. A small lamp sitting on the dresser that stood against the wall to his left softly illuminated the room. The other man appeared to be meditating. He was still fully dressed, including his arm wrappings, and Sasuke had to wonder if he ever changed. His face mask was pulled down, but his hair was still tied up under his hide. Opting not to disturb him, Sasuke reached for the handle, preparing to pull the door closed. "Need something, Sasuke?" Naruto said, not turning to look at him. Sasuke paused in surprise. "I was just wondering if you were up," he finally said. Naruto did turn to look at him then. The light of the lamp caused odd shadows to dance across the contours of his face and made it difficult to read his expression. Naruto stood, and his shadow stretched across the room, reminding Sasuke of Shikamaru's Kagemane no jutsu. "I told you I don't sleep much," Naruto said, turning from him and moving to sit on the bed that was in the corner of the room across from the dresser. "Well, I figured you'd take advantage of being here to get some rest," Sasuke told him, stepping through the door. "It's not like you'll get attacked in Konoha." Naruto snorted, catching Sasuke off guard. "It's not shinobi attacking me that I worry about," he said. "Then, what?" Sasuke asked in confusion. There was a long pause as Naruto seemed to debate whether or not to tell him. "Today," Naruto finally began. "What happened in the kitchen? That was rare." Kyuubi was trying to prove a point. "He rarely tries to overpower me when I'm fully aware." Sasuke had unconsciously moved further into the room. "When I said I only sleep for a few hours, that was a lie. I'll catch half an hour here and there, but usually I don't sleep at all. When I sleep is when he strikes. The first time I woke to find him weaving his essence through me was terrifying. It took everything I had to push him back. Every time he does it, a little more of him becomes a part of me." "He's trying to merge with you?" "Not trying," Naruto said, and when his blue eyes looked up at Sasuke in the dim light, he swore they looked haunted. Sasuke shook his head. "Don't be stupid, Dobi," he said, refusing to believe what Naruto said could possibly be true. Naruto growled at him, and Sasuke had to admit, the sound wasn't altogether human. "I'm not being stupid," he snapped. "It's not my imagination and I'm not worrying over nothing." He turned away, refusing to look at Sasuke. "Forget it," he finally said. "I was stupid to think the great Uchiha Sasuke would understand." Sasuke felt his stomach clench at the words. Naruto had opened up to him and he'd blown it. He hesitated before moving over to the bed and sitting next to Naruto, who turned from him, giving Sasuke a good view of his profile. Naruto, Gomen. He took the time to study Naruto's features. It seemed he never had much of an opportunity, since the other man kept his mask up as much as possible. The last time Sasuke had really seen him, Naruto was 12. That brief time in battle when they were 15 didn't really count. He wasn't exactly trying to get a good look at the boy. Naruto had lost his baby fat in exchange for muscle. He had a lean, yet athletic build. His chin and jawline had become more angular. Sasuke frowned as he realized that he hadn't noticed that the whisker marks on Naruto's cheeks had grown more pronounced. They were wider and darker. "Why don't you ever take off your hide?" Sasuke asked. "My hair would give me away, don't you think?" Naruto said with a small smile. "There's no one here but me," Sasuke reminded him. "I know," Naruto answered quietly. There was a long silence before Sasuke spoke. "Can I see your hair?" Naruto looked at him in surprise, furrowing his eyebrows. "Why?" "Because I haven't seen it in 10 years, and I miss seeing the color." Naruto's eyes widened before he looked away. "I told you, it gives me away." "Naruto, I already know who you are," Sasuke said. "It doesn't give away who I am. It gives away who I'm becoming." Sasuke frowned deeply at his words. Naruto reached up and slowly began to untie his hide. Sasuke watched in silence as he pulled it off. Golden locks fell from the dark cloth, falling loosely around his face. They were longer than the last time Sasuke had seen them and, taking in how they gently framed Naruto's face, Sasuke was reminded of the fourth Hokage. But more was different to Naruto's hair than just the length. Reaching a hand to gently finger the locks, he let a few strands of red hair fall through his fingers. Littered throughout the blonde strands were streaks of fiery red highlights. He looked questioningly at Naruto, who calmly allowed him to touch his hair. "The more connected we become, the redder it gets," Naruto explained. It started out barely noticeable. He looked down, his expression almost seemed ashamed. When he spoke again his voice cracked and Sasuke could tell he was crying. "I don't know what to do, Sasuke. I can't stop him. I'm tired, so tired." Sasuke's chest ached when Naruto started to sob. Reacting purely on instinct, he reached out and pulled Naruto to him, holding him while he sobbed into his shoulder. "So what the hell's going on with Uchiha?" Kiba asked, leaning his head back and downing a shot of sake. Kiba was wearing his Junin uniform, and the red marks on his cheeks became more pronounced as his face flushed from the alcohol. Akamaru sat at his feet under the table, having grown too big to perch on Kiba's head years ago. "What do you mean, Kiba?" Rock Lee asked from the seat across from him. Lee had grown to look almost exactly like Guy. He wore the same green training suit he had when he was younger, and now he had a Junin vest over it just as his sensei wore it. The main difference between the two was Lee's round eyes, which gave him the look of perpetual innocence. The others at the round table looked to Kiba for explain. Since they had been old enough to drink, the group of genin that had taken their first Chunin exam together had been coming to the bar once a week to get together and catch up on one another's lives. They always inhabited a large round table in the back corner of the dark pub, away from the bustle that was always around the bar. The group varied from week to week. Sometimes people were on missions or had other duties, but they all came whenever their schedules allowed. Tonight Kiba, Hinata, Choji, Shikamaru, Ino, Lee, and Sakura sat around the table. They knew Kiba wasn't commenting on Sasuke not being there, because Sasuke was never there, not for lack of trying on Sakura's part. Since Naruto's death and Sasuke's return, the moody man had barely spoken to any of them unless it was in the context of a mission. "Shino told me there was some weird surge of chakra from his house today," Kiba explained. Shikamaru saw Sakura and Ino exchange odd looks. "Now what was that about?" Kiba continued. "When he and that new Junin, the twitchy one, what's his name? Ritsu?" Choji offered, stuffing a radish in his mouth. "Yeah," Kiba said. "They went to check if everything was okay and he told him he had been practicing Chidori." "In his house?" Hinata asked in her soft voice. She looked as she always had. Her hair was the same short bob and the only difference in her outfit was the Chunin vest that had taken the place of her old jacket. "Yeah," Kiba said with a snort. "I know." Shino also said the chakra didn't feel like Chidori at all. It didn't even feel like Uchiha's chakra. "Maybe it was that guy," Sakura said to Ino. "What guy?" Lee asked the pink-haired woman next to him. "Did Shino mention him?" Sakura asked Kiba. "Some strange masked guy is staying with Sasuke-kun." Whoa, whoa, whoa. Uchiha, the self-imposed introvert and all-around antisocial bastard, has some stranger staying with him? Kiba said. Sakura shrugged, ignoring the insults to Sasuke. The older she got, the less delusional she became. "That's what he told me. This guy is really suspicious though." Ino finally spoke up, and Shikamaru realized how quiet she had been until that point. "Not suspicious, Sakura. Scary." Sakura looked at her sympathetically and Shikamaru's curiosity was piqued. "What do you mean, Ino?" he asked. Everyone was looking at her curiously. With a sigh she explained what had happened earlier that day. Shikamaru was the type of person who showed very little emotion, simply because it took too much effort for him to change his expression. So when Ino told her story and his eyes progressively widened, everyone at the table found themselves staring at him. "What did this guy look like?" he asked her. "Well, we couldn't see his face, he had a mask on, and his hite covered all of his hair," Ino said. Nodding and lost in thought, Shikamaru lifted his sake for a drink. "The only thing I noticed about him was his bright blue eyes," Sakura said, almost sadly. Shikamaru choked on his sake and stood suddenly. "I have to go," he said. "Shikamaru?" Choji said, looking up at him. "See you later," he called over his shoulder before exiting the bar. "What the hell was that about?" Kiba asked as they all stared at the door Shikamaru had just left through. Sasuke awoke early the next morning to the smell of eggs. Sitting up and looking around in confusion, he realized he was in his guest room. He sighed, realizing that at some point last night he must have fallen asleep. Naruto had eventually composed himself and they'd moved off the subject of Kyuubi. Laying side by side on the bed, they told one another some of the things that had happened over the last 10 years. Sasuke stopped in his room to grab a shirt before entering the kitchen. Naruto stood at his stove scrambling eggs. His mask was down around his neck and he'd put his hite back on. "Hungry?" Naruto asked when Sasuke walked in. "Yeah," he answered, going to the cupboard and grabbing plates. "Sorry I fell asleep," he said, holding the plates as Naruto dished out the eggs. "I didn't expect you to stay up all night just because I do," Naruto said, setting the pan of eggs back on the stove and taking his plate from Sasuke. They had just sat down at the table and begun to eat when there was a knock on the door. Naruto grinned. "You certainly get a lot of visitors." Sasuke set his fork down in exasperation. "I've had more people come here in the last 2 days than I've had all year." Naruto laughed, taking another mouthful of eggs. He remained in the kitchen as Sasuke went to answer the door. Sasuke was surprised to pull open the door and see Shikamaru. He hardly talked to the Junin, let alone received visits from him. "Shikamaru," he said with a nod of acknowledgement. "Sasuke," Shikamaru said in greeting. "I came by to see Naruto." It was said so bluntly that all Sasuke could do was gape at him slack-jawed. Naruto, who had been listening, poked his head out of the kitchen to stare at Shikamaru, still holding his fork and wearing an expression startlingly similar to Sasuke's. "Oyo, Naruto," Shikamaru said, looking past Sasuke to the disembodied head that was peeking out of the kitchen. Snapping his mouth shut, Naruto shrugged with smile. "Oyo, Shikamaru." The three men sat around Sasuke's kitchen table, Naruto and Sasuke staring at Shikamaru as he ate some eggs. "So," Sasuke finally said. "How did you know?" Ino goes into the mind of some strange guy with bright blue eyes and sees he's got something residing in him. The same day there's a strange surge of chakra coming from your house where this guy happens to be staying. It doesn't take a genius to figure out. Naruto grinned. "And since you are a genius, it must have been pretty simple for you." Shikamaru nodded. "Did you tell anyone else?" Sasuke asked. "No," Shikamaru said. "I figured that if it hasn't been made common knowledge, there's a reason." "Yeah," Naruto said. "If you could just keep it to yourself it would be appreciated." Shikamaru nodded. "So why go through all the trouble of pretending you're dead?" he asked. Naruto tensed and Sasuke sent a glare at Shikamaru, who pointedly ignored him. "It's a long story, Shikamaru," Naruto said with a forced smile. Shikamaru studied him for a moment and Sasuke had every intention of throwing the Junin out if he pressed the subject. He would not let Shikamaru upset Naruto, not after seeing him last night. Shikamaru didn't push it though, recognizing both Naruto's discomfort and Sasuke's rising ire. Shikamaru might have asked something else but he was cut off by a poof of smoke above Naruto's head. When the smoke cleared, Sasuke and Shikamaru stared at the large orange frog that sat on Naruto's head. Naruto rolled his eyes upwards, but could only see the orange flippers that rested on his forehead. With a sigh, he said, "Gamakichi, what did I tell you about popping up without being summoned?" "Big problems, kid," the frog said, ignoring him. Holding out his palms in front of him, Naruto allowed Gamakichi to jump into his hands. "What's going on?" he asked when the frog was facing him. Sasuke and Shikamaru noticed his serious tone. "Akatsuki's moving towards Konoha, but on the way they are ransacking villages, destroying everything they can." "What?" Naruto exclaimed. "Judging by their movements their next target is a small village about 30 miles from here." "Are you sure?" Naruto said. "Gamatatsu has been watching them like you asked. This is the only logical next move for them," Gamakichi told him. Naruto nodded. "How long before they get there?" 4 days, tops. "That'll be enough time," Naruto said, apparently deep in thought. "Enough time for what?" Sasuke asked. "To get there before they do," Naruto replied. He nodded to Gamakichi, who disappeared from his hands. Naruto stood. "You can't be serious," Sasuke said, standing as well. "Well, I'm certainly not joking," Naruto said. "Don't be stupid." Sasuke growled angrily. "You can't defeat all of Akatsuki by yourself." Naruto shrugged. "I'll be fine. You said you would stay," Sasuke reminded him. "I never said how long," Naruto countered. "The Hokage ordered that you stay in Konoha." Sasuke moved to block the exit. "Sasuke, I'm dead, remember? I'm not under her rules anymore." Now, if you don't get out of my way I'll crack more than your ribs this time, Naruto said, incredibly calm. Shikamaru, who had been quietly watching the exchange, decided it might be time to interject. Naruto, taking on Akatsuki alone would be suicide. Surely you realize that? Naruto's gaze shifted to the pony-tailed shinobi, but he said nothing. In fact, he suddenly looked a bit uncomfortable. It was then Sasuke realized what Naruto was thinking. He had realized. Striding across the kitchen so quickly Naruto didn't have a chance to react. He raised a fist and punched the whiskered man. Naruto's head whipped to the side and he remained that way, refusing to meet Sasuke's accusatory glare. Don't you ever think like that again, Sasuke hissed angrily. Shikamaru could do nothing but gape at them. The tense silence pervaded in the kitchen until finally Shikamaru spoke. Perhaps we should speak to the Hokage about this. The two men turned to look at him. It's likely she'll send out a large team of shinobi to protect the village. Also, it will be a good indication of Akatsuki's strength. Naruto sighed, and then nodded, still not meeting Sasuke's eyes. Sakura quickly made her way into the meeting room. She had just woken up when Ino had knocked on her door, telling her the Hokage had called an emergency meeting. With a frown, Sakura had rushed to get ready. Emergency meetings didn't usually involve Chunin. Junin and Anbu often went while the Chunin continued their normal duties around the village. When she entered the meeting hall it was full of shinobi, all of whom were talking amongst themselves. Spotting Ino, Lee, and Choji, she made her way through the crowd. With quick hellos she asked, "So what's going on?" They shrugged. "No idea," Ino said. Kiba, Hinata, and Shino joined them, neither of them having any more of a clue about the reason for the meeting than they did. "Ohio, everyone," a voice said. They turned to see an Anbu standing behind them. The mask was the face of a rabbit, two red whiskers painted along the cheeks. They recognized the Anbu immediately since her hood was down and two buns of black hair were visible near the top of her head. "Hey, Tenten," Lee said, happy to see his old teammate. Tenten pulled her mask off and smiled at them with sparkling gray eyes. As Tenten moved closer they could see another Anbu behind her. His uniform was clearly visible, for he didn't have his robes on. Long black hair flowed from behind his mask, which was the shape of a bird. "Ohio, Neji Nissan," Hinata said, bowing in greeting. Neji nodded at her. "Do you guys know what's going on?" Kiba asked the Anbu. "No," Tenten said, shaking her head. "Sasuke called us in but we haven't been told anything." "Look," a booming voice called. "It's my old students, together again. Gai-sensei," Lee said excitedly as the green-clad Junin strolled over to them. Asuma and Kurenai followed him, warmly greeting their former students as well. "Kakashi, my rival," Gai called loudly to the silver-haired Junin that stood across the room. "Come see the young ones." Everyone was looking at their large group now, taking in the odd mixture of Chunin, Junin, and Anbu. Kakashi walked over to them, his eye narrowed into a smile as a greeting. They all fell into an easy banter until the Hokage entered the room and a hush fell. Tsunade made her way to the podium at the front of the room and all the shinobi moved in behind her as she passed. The crowd reparted quickly as the Anbu captain strode in after her, fully robed. He took his seat in the front of the room near the Hokage's advisors, Homura, Kaharu, and Shizune. The group of friends was surprised to see Shikamaru enter after Sasuke, walking next to a masked man. He leaned in, saying something to the man, who nodded. Shikamaru then walked further into the crowd and stood next to Choji. The man stayed in the back, leaning casually against the wall. Those who were in the pub the night before all gaped at Shikamaru, who stared straight ahead, not meeting anyone's gaze. "Is that the guy?" Kiba whispered to Sakura. She nodded. Akamaru whined at Kiba's feet and Kiba reached down, absently patting the dog's head. Tsunade spoke and any thoughts of the masked man were pushed aside. "Information regarding the Akatsuki has been brought to light. For the Chunin here, I know that you weren't aware of Akatsuki's return, however we've deemed it necessary that you are all informed of the details. We are now definite that Akatsuki is heading towards Konoha." No one spoke, but there was a collective noise of uncomfortable shifting from the Chunin, who had not been aware that such a threat existed. With a quick glance behind her, Sakura noticed that the masked man hadn't moved from his position against the wall and he didn't seem surprised at all. Wouldn't this be new information for him? He had said he was a Chunin. Tsunade continued. As they come towards Konoha, they are attacking other villages of the Fire Country. We know where they will strike next. The reason I've called you all here is that we plan to send a large group of shinobi to intercept Akatsuki at their next target. This is a dangerous mission because we do not know their numbers or have a clear idea of their strength. We also have reason to believe they are being led by Orochimaru. A murmur went up through the crowd and Tsunade held up a hand to quiet them. Sakura immediately looked to Sasuke for some type of reaction, but with his mask on she could only look at his body language, and he hadn't even tensed when Tsunade had made the announcement. He must have already known. There are some of you, Tsunade said. I will be asking specifically to go. Otherwise we are asking for volunteers. This is an A-class mission, so no chunins will be forced to go. If you would like to volunteer, please see Homura, Kaharu, or Shizune. Because we cannot afford to leave Konoha unprotected, it is possible you'll be asked to remain here. Discuss among yourselves, but if you plan to volunteer, please do so before you leave. With that, the Hokage stepped down from the podium and made her way into the crowd, stopping to talk to certain junin as she went. A buzz began immediately. Kiba pushed his way over to Shikamaru and the others gathered around the ponytailed man as well. Shikamaru, what the hell's going on? Kiba asked. Shikamaru rolled his eyes, sighing. Don't you listen, Kiba? Tsunade-sama just explained it all. Not that, Kiba said. What happened last night? And who's that guy? He said, jabbing his thumb over his shoulder at the masked man who remained quietly in the back of the room. Everyone was waiting for Shikamaru's response, even Neji, Tenten, and Shino, who hadn't been at the pub the night before, and the older Junin who really had no idea what had happened. Kiba nearly jumped out of his skin when a low voice spoke right next to him. Neji, Tenten, Sasuke said to his two Anbu. The Hokage has asked me to put together a squad of Anbu for this mission, and I'd like you two to be on it. He didn't bother removing his mask, even around the group of people he'd known from childhood. Hi, Tenten said, and Neji inclined his head in an affirmative. Sasuke nodded, and without a word to the rest of them he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd. Nice to see you too, Uchiha, Kiba said. He turned to continue his interrogation of Shikamaru, but was interrupted again when Tsunade walked over. Kakashi, Guy, I'd like for the two of you to go on the mission. They nodded. Good, she said. Report to Shikamaru tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Shikamaru? Kakashi asked. Yes, he and Sasuke will be leading this mission. Sasuke is taking care of the Anbu and Shikamaru is commanding the Junin and any Chunin that volunteer. Guy and Kakashi looked at one another as she moved away, telling Lee, Kiba, Shino, and Choji that she wanted them on the mission. Do you suddenly feel extremely old? Guy asked. Kakashi nodded, glancing at their leader, who seemed to be watching his companions with little interest. In fact, one could say he looked bored. Sakura, Ino, and Hinata rejoined the group, having gone and volunteered. The room began to empty out as those who had volunteered and those who weren't planning to left. Ino looked over to where the masked man stood, arms folded and eyes closed as he leaned against the wall. I wonder if he's going to volunteer, she said to no one in particular. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura said to the silver-haired Junin, who stood near Guy. Do you know anything about that guy? Glancing in his direction, Kakashi was startled to see blue eyes meet his gaze, but made no outward indication of his surprise. No, Sakura, I'm just as in the dark as you are. He held eye contact with the man for a moment, until the blue eyes closed once again. Everyone turned to Shikamaru, whose eyes were half-lidded and almost looked as though he was going to attempt sleeping standing up. What? He asked when he noticed all the eyes on him. You were talking to him, Ino said. Do you know who he is? Shikamaru shrugged. We've met. Everyone, including the older generation of Junin, who were equally as curious about the stranger, was about to launch into questions when Sasuke walked back up to the group. Ready? Sasuke asked flatly, as if he really didn't care one way or the other. There was a bit of confusion at the question since, 1. Sasuke rarely spoke to any of them, and 2. His mask prevented them from seeing where exactly his question was directed. Shikamaru put an end to the confusion by sighing and saying, "How troublesome," before following Sasuke over to the masked man. Pushing himself from the wall, he greeted them with a curt nod before the three of them left, completely ignoring the rest of them. Okay, seriously, Kiba said when they had departed. What the hell is going on? Akamaru barked. What are you doing here, old man? Naruto asked. They were bringing up the rear in a long line of shinobi. There were about 50 ninjas picked for the mission and they were making their way quickly towards the village Gamakichi had warned Naruto about. Naruto sighed, thinking about how much quicker he could have gotten there if he'd just gone himself. Jiraiya threw him an irritated look at the question. I'm not one to miss an opportunity to kick Orochimaru's ass. Naruto's eyes appeared thoughtful. I don't ever recall you kicking Orochimaru's ass. In fact, every time I've seen you face him you've ended up as a human crater. Jiraiya thwapped him on the head. No respect. Naruto's eyes crinkled in a grin, but the expression fell when he felt eyes on him again. Looking ahead to the middle of the line he saw a pair of pale, pupil-less eyes staring at him. When he met Hinata's gaze she blushed and turned quickly. Naruto sighed. At least she hadn't been using Byakugan. Who knew what she would see? Ever since the mission had begun people had been sneaking looks at him, as if watching him would help them figure out the mystery he presented. He'd caught everyone from Ino to Kakashi, he was pretty certain he'd even seen the stoic Shino watching him as well, but with the sunglasses it was difficult to tell. Popular, aren't we? Jiraiya teased. If I had known the best way to get everyone's attention was to be as quiet and unobtrusive as possible, I wouldn't have tried being so annoying when I was a kid, Naruto said in exasperation. Jiraiya laughed. It's the mask, he said. It adds to the mystery. Naruto shrugged. Sasuke suddenly appeared beside them. He was wearing his armor and mask, his katana strapped across his back. Blue eyes rolled as Sasuke fell into step with them. I'm still here, Sasuke, Naruto said, obviously irritated. I know, the Anbu replied. This was not the first time Sasuke had checked up on him. Whether Sasuke was afraid he was going to run off or try and kill himself right there on the walk to the village, Naruto wasn't sure, but it was beginning to annoy him. Stop playing mother hen and get back to your troops, Naruto snapped a little louder than he'd intended. The fox mask turned towards him, but Naruto had no idea what type of expression it hid. Finally Sasuke grunted and disappeared, presumably returning to the head of the line with the rest of the Anbu. Those who could hear the conversation were wide-eyed. No one dared talk to the Anbu captain like that, not even those who had known him when he was younger. Kakashi and Guy, who had remained towards the back of the line, exchanged glances. Their curiosity piqued even further. The metal roof tiles were cool under his hands when he leaned back, his weight on his arms as he stared up into the night sky. From his position on the roof of a bakery that was closed for the night, he could see several shinobi pacing the outskirts of the village on sentry duty, looking for any sign of Akatsuki. They'd arrived at the village just before sundown. The villagers had been surprised but cooperative, grateful for protection. They had heard what was happening in the other villages. Everything was quiet so far. The villagers and most of the shinobi were sleeping and resting for the battle that was likely to begin the next day. Naruto had managed to sneak away from the watchful eyes of Sasuke and Shikamaru. He and Sasuke hadn't actually been speaking since the day before, save for Naruto telling him to leave him alone several times throughout the journey to the village. When they'd returned to Sasuke's house after the meeting, Shikamaru and Sasuke spoke about strategies and Naruto went to the guest room to meditate. After Shikamaru had left, the entire house seemed filled with nearly tangible tension between Sasuke and Naruto. Sasuke had obviously not been prepared to find out Naruto valued his life at so little, and Naruto had not been prepared for Sasuke's angry reaction to this information. He heard feet land lightly on the shingles behind him. Turning his head slightly, he watched as Guy No. He corrected when the man's face was illuminated by the moonlight. Lee walked over to him. Ah, Lee said softly when he could see Naruto. His hair and face were still covered, but he'd now become recognizable as the mysterious masked man. Sorry to disturb you, Lee said, drawing even with him. I saw a shadowy figure on the roof and thought I should check it out. It's okay, Naruto said, returning his gaze to the stars that twinkled brightly above them. My name's Rock Lee, the dark-haired man said, extending his hand down to him. Nice to meet you, Naruto said, grasping Lee's calloused palm, but not offering his name. If Lee noticed he hadn't been given a name, he made no comment. So, he said, how do you know Uchiha Sasuke? The Hokage is making me stay with him. It wasn't a lie. Lee nodded, looking up at the stars. I can't imagine he's much fun to live with, he said. Naruto shrugged, a small smile pulling at his hidden lips. He's definitely a broody bastard. Lee grinned down at him. He's always been like that, he said. Of course he wasn't quite as bad before, he cut himself off with a frown. Naruto looked up at him curiously. Before what? Well, he's never been quite the same since a friend of his died, Lee said sadly. Actually, none of us have. Konoha never seemed so quiet until he was gone. Naruto looked down at the roof tiles, his stomach turning with regret. His friends had missed him. He'd often wondered if that would be the case or if his absence would go mostly unnoticed, not affecting anyone's lives. How he wished he could speak to them again, the way he used to. Just be the careless stupid person he once was, annoying his friends. He shook his head slightly. He had made the right decision. He was protecting these people, and to do that they must not know he still existed. He had no regrets. Already he had spent too much time around them. Any moment with him was a moment in danger, whether they knew it or not. His resolve strengthened. After this mission he'd leave, with or without Tsunade Baba's permission or Sasuke's knowledge. Well, Lee said, breaking Naruto's train of thought. I should get back to sentry duty. Naruto sent him a nod and the green-clad man leapt from the roof, gracefully landing on the ground and making his way back through the village. It was a few moments before the presence Naruto had sensed while speaking with Lee decided to make himself known. Hiding yourself from your old friends, Naruto-kun? With a sigh, Naruto stood, turning to face the newcomer. Naruto grimaced as he took in the white-haired man's appearance. His skin was pulled tightly over his face, giving him an emaciated look. He no longer wore his glasses and his eyes bulged unnaturally from his face. The years have not been kind to you, Kabuto, Naruto said. Or, I suppose I should call you Orochimaru. Kabuto's face broke into a manic grin. Yes, Kabuto was kind enough to lend me his body when Sasuke-kun rebelled. Are you here to reclaim him? Naruto asked, crossing his arms over his chest. No, Orochimaru said. I thought he was the body I wanted, but I've since revised my opinion. Naruto watched him speak with a guarded expression. See, I always thought of you as a little Jiraiya, stupid and not very talented. He paused, waiting for Naruto to react, but continued when Naruto simply gazed at him flatly. But, Jiraiya has proved that luck and persistence can make you strong. You, Naruto-kun, your luck was having Kyuubi sealed in you. Unlimited power at your fingertips. Naruto did raise an eyebrow at that. Orochimaru could not possibly be suggesting what he seemed to be suggesting. Uchiha Itachi had the right idea coming after you. Your stupidity made me overlook you before, but once I control your body that particular weakness won't be a problem. And I'll have the power of Kyuubi to use as I please. Apparently, Naruto thought, Orochimaru was suggesting exactly what he seemed to be suggesting. What makes you sure you can control Kyuubi's power? Naruto asked. Orochimaru laughed. Do you realize who you're talking to? Rolling his eyes, Naruto muttered, an overconfident bastard? Louder he said, there's only one problem with this theory of yours. I would have to be willing. And I'm not. Orochimaru laughed again and Naruto grit his teeth at the irritating sound. 10 years ago, yes, you would have had to be willing. But I've discovered a new jutsu since then. Now, you just have to be unconscious. Naruto's eyes widened as Kabuto's mouth opened and Orochimaru's tongue flew from his mouth. He quickly dodged, but the tongue followed him. He had to use his full speed to avoid being hit. Dashing across the rooftop he pulled out several shuriken, flinging them at Orochimaru, who leapt into the air to dodge. Naruto used this chance to get in close, avoiding the tongue. Chakra began to gather in his right palm. Oh no you don't, Orochimaru said, recognizing the technique. He retracted his tongue at a high speed, purposely slamming it into the back of Naruto's head. Stars burst in front of his eyes and Naruto fell to his knees in front of the snake-like man, the chakra in his hand disappearing. With a smirk Orochimaru swiftly brought his knee up, catching Naruto hard in the jaw and sending him sprawling across the roof. Lowering his mask momentarily to spit out blood, Naruto shakily started to make his way to his feet. A kick to his ribs from Orochimaru sent him sliding along the roof tiles and dangerously close to the edge. He saw the tongue speeding towards him but was unable to dodge as it wrapped around his leg, pulling him upside down into the air. Lee felt a strong gathering of chakra and turned to see the masked man he'd just been speaking with fighting with a strange man on the roof he'd just left. Calling to a nearby Chunin to inform Shikamaru and Sasuke, He and several sentries made their way quickly towards the fight. They arrived in time to see the masked man lifted into the air by the other's tongue, which was impossibly and disgustingly long. Lee watched as the man used his tongue to throw the masked man off the roof. He hit the ground painfully hard and rolled towards Lee before the momentum of the throw wore out and his limp body skidded to a stop. Running towards him, Lee dropped to a knee to make sure he was still alive. The man was bloodied and bruised on the small part of his face that he could see, and his arm was bent in a very unnatural way, presumably from the fall. He was unconscious but alive. "Get a medical nin," Lee told one of the sentries, who hurried away. 2 puffs of smoke announced the arrival of Sasuke and Shikamaru, who quickly took in the situation. As soon as he saw the masked man laying on the ground, Sasuke quickly kneeled next to him, across from Lee. Sasuke hadn't bothered to put his mask on, and Lee was surprised at the worry splayed across the normally stoic man's face. Assured that he was still breathing, Sasuke stood, glaring angrily at the man on the roof. "Ah, Sasuke-kun," the man said. "Just in time to witness me take my new body." Sasuke's eyes grew wide when he recognized Orochimaru's voice as the white-haired man began making seals. He didn't know what to do to protect Naruto, but he'd be damned he'd let that snake take control of him the way he had been taken control of. But before Sasuke could do anything, Orochimaru stopped, opening his eyes and laughing. "You're better than I gave you credit for," he said, looking at Naruto's still form. "I'll do this next time I see you." And with that he had disappeared. Sasuke, Shikamaru, Lee and the 3 other sentries looked curiously at the unconscious man on the ground. Sasuke went back to kneel by Naruto's side. What did Orochimaru mean? Naruto seemed to pose no threat. With a poof, the sentry Lee had sent off appeared, Sakura with him. Her pink hair was sticking every which way, having come directly after being roused from sleep. She saw Sasuke kneeling next to the masked man and rushed to the injured man's side, shooing Sasuke away to get room to work. Quickly assessing the damage, she moved to use her chakra to begin healing and nearly screamed when her patient disappeared in a poof of smoke. They all stared at the empty spot in amazement. "Don't waste your chakra," a voice said. Turning, they saw the masked man emerge from the shadow of the building the fight had taken place on, looking no more injured than when Lee had spoken to him. "The replacement technique?" Lee said in confusion. "No," Sakura said, glancing at the space in front of her, which was devoid of any logs. She would have known if it was a normal fake. She had felt chakra in the clone in front of her. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Who is this guy?" Sakura said angrily, pointing at Naruto, who was sitting at the head of a long rectangular table. After Orochimaru had disappeared, they had moved to the meeting room the inn had provided for them. Lee stood next to Sakura, a calming hand on her arm, looking curiously between Sasuke, who stood silently behind Naruto, for once having his Anbu mask hanging from his hip instead of covering his face, and Shikamaru, who was sitting a few seats from Naruto, his cheek resting on his palm. Sakura continued, "He said he's a chunin, but he can hold a Kage Bunshin long enough that the clone appeared injured. That's incredibly difficult. How did he even learn the technique? It's forbidden. No chunin should be able to perform it." "Sakura, we did know a shinobi who could use Kage Bunshin as a genin," Lee reminded her, not noticing the other 3 men in the room shift subtly at his words. "This is different, Lee. Naruto was trustworthy." Naruto didn't know whether to be pleased she thought so highly of him or offended that she didn't consider the current him trustworthy. It was bizarre to be praised and insulted in the same sentence. Silence had descended over the room. It was rare that Naruto was talked about, even among those he had been closest to. It was a wound that had never fully healed. There was also an unspoken agreement that the subject was never broached around Sasuke, and now Lee and Sakura were watching him warily for a reaction. Shikamaru might have been slightly worried himself if he hadn't known Naruto was sitting in front of Sasuke, looking slightly puzzled at the sudden quiet. Shikamaru finally spoke. "Sakura," he said, "Tsunade, Jiraiya, Sasuke, and I fully trust him. There's no cause for alarm. Shikamaru, he knows a forbidden jutsu. Plus remember what Ino said. Can everyone stop talking about me as if I'm not sitting right here?" Naruto interjected, eyebrows raised. Everyone turned to him. He was looking at Sakura. "I told you I was technically a chunin," he said. "I've never taken the Junin exam, so I can't claim to be one, but my skills are likely at Junin level." "Then why didn't you tell us that up front?" Sakura demanded. Because the way you and Ino talk, it is impossible to get a word in edgewise. Naruto said in exasperation. It grew quiet for a moment as Naruto rolled his eyes and the other three men in the room awaited Sakura's response with bated breath. She did not take criticism well. Sure enough. Who the hell do you think you are? She yelled, making to lunge for him. For his part, Naruto didn't even flinch. Lee managed to get a hold of her before she could get anywhere. Shikamaru sighed. Women were so troublesome. Sasuke chose to ignore Sakura. Well, at least we know for certain that Orochimaru's alive. Sakura quieted down. And what he's after, Shikamaru added, glancing at Naruto. Naruto stood. Are we done? I'm going to bed. Shikamaru appeared thoughtful, then he nodded. It was fast approaching dawn. The last thing he wanted was several of his most skillful companions ill-rested. Go ahead. Turning to the rest of the shinobi in the room he said, all of you should get some sleep as well. Orochimaru's nearby. Battle could begin at any time. With one last glare at Naruto, Sakura left in a huff, Lee trailing after her after smiling at them. Sasuke watched as Naruto walked out without another word. With a quick goodbye to Shikamaru, he trailed after him. Naruto had said he was going to bed, but Sasuke knew that couldn't be true. And there were things they needed to talk about. The silent treatment had gone on long enough. Sasuke only gave a short knock of warning before walking into Naruto's room. It was furnished just as his own room down the hall was. A bed was in the center, with a nightstand next to it, one chair, and a set of dressers stood against the far wall. The room was dark and Sasuke almost thought that Naruto hadn't come back until he caught sight of the light in the corner where the bathroom door was slightly ajar. He removed his katana and set it near the door, his mask resting on the hilt. Naruto, he said, pushing the door open. Naruto's back was to the door and he was hunched over the sink. Sasuke heard him spit before he straightened, seemingly ignoring him. He wiped his mouth, then took a drink from the glass of water in his hand, sloshing it around his mouth with a grimace before leaning over and spitting again. This time Sasuke saw the red tint the water had to it as it disappeared into the sink. Naruto straightened again, not turning, but meeting Sasuke's gaze in the mirror that hung over the sink. Haven't you heard of knocking? He said. Are you hurt? Sasuke asked, completely ignoring his question. I bit my tongue when Orochimaru kneed me in the jaw, Naruto said with a shrug, taking another mouthful of water. I thought that was a clone, Sasuke said. No, Naruto said after spitting again. I didn't get a chance to cage Bunshin until the bastard almost knocked me off the roof. He was so pleased with himself he didn't notice the real me slide down from the building. You should have told Sakura you were hurt, she could have healed you. And pulled down my mask, discovered who I am, faint, recover, and tell everyone within a 20-mile radius, Naruto said. I'll take my chances with the glass of water. Besides, it'll be healed in a few hours anyway. Sasuke grimaced at the overt mention of Kyuubi. He backed out of the bathroom as Naruto made to exit, setting the cup on the sink as he did. Sasuke watched as he made his way to the bed, flopping down on his back and draping an arm over his eyes. Oh, what I wouldn't give to sleep, he murmured, so low that Sasuke almost didn't catch it. The raven-haired man felt a wave of intense anger at the fox. It wasn't fair that Naruto had to deal with this. No one should have to. No wonder Naruto was thinking about. Naruto? Sasuke asked. A weary, was his reply. Sasuke wasn't sure he really wanted to broach this subject, but he continued anyway. The other day, when you said you were going to face Akatsuki alone. Sasuke fumbled for the words and Naruto sat up, patiently waiting for him to speak. It was rare to see the other man so flustered and Naruto smirked slightly as Sasuke searched for a way to say what he wanted to say. Do you really want to? Sasuke stopped, looking uncomfortable, and Naruto decided to put the poor man out of his misery. He knew what Sasuke was trying to ask. Yes, he said, meeting Sasuke's eyes. I would like to die. Sasuke sucked in a breath. He hadn't been expecting such a direct answer. But, Sasuke, I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since I was 17. Any normal man would be dead already. If it weren't for Kyuubi's refusal to let me drop dead from exhaustion, I would be. I am slowly losing myself to a demon that will kill everything in its sight if given the chance. I rarely have human contact for fear that somehow people will discover I'm alive. The only company I ever have is from frogs, and even that is rare. Everyone I know thinks I'm dead. Do you have any idea what a tired, miserable, and lonely existence I lead? Dying would be a relief I can't even begin to comprehend. I know you're alive, Sasuke snapped. Isn't that enough? He had lived through the loss of his friend once, but the idea of trying to do it again was unfathomable. You shouldn't know that I'm alive, Sasuke. It's not safe for anyone to know. That's why I left in the first place. I can protect myself. Don't act like I'm helpless. Who are you to say we can't know you're alive? Sasuke said angrily. What gives you the right to make that choice for us? No one can protect themselves from this, Naruto said. This is not some shinobi. This is Kyuubi. That's not the point. You should give us the option. Are you afraid we'd choose to leave you alone? Is that why you ran away? No, Naruto whispered. I was deathly afraid that for some stupid, stubborn reason, people would choose to stay with me. I cannot watch those important to me die by my hands. I refuse to do it. Sasuke didn't answer him. They hadn't noticed, but the morning sun had begun to peer through the window. There was a sound of a knock, and Sasuke went to answer the door, grateful for the distraction. Neji stood in the hall, fully dressed, including his mask. They're coming, he said simply. Sasuke was instantly sobered by the news. Shikamaru knows? Neji nodded. He's outside now. Gather the rest of the Anbu, we'll meet outside in 5 minutes. Hi, Neji said, disappearing. Sasuke closed the door, turning to see Naruto, his mask once again in place. Naruto shrugged. Duty calls. Sasuke grabbed his fox mask and katana from their position against the wall and secured them into their places. Let's go end this, he said. Shikamaru looked towards the hill the village sat next to, watching grimly as figure after figure appeared atop it, silently staring down at them. They had known that Akatsuki was growing in numbers, but none of them had imagined by this much. Shikamaru had some of the best ninjas Konoha had to offer standing with him, but being outnumbered at what he estimated was 15-1 was not encouraging odds. Konoha ninjas were gathered at the bottom of the hill looking up at the vast amount of shinobi above them. Some of Shikamaru's men had been sent to warn the villagers, leading them away from where the battle would take place. Jiraiya suddenly appeared next to Shikamaru, giving the younger man a nod. Looking further to his left, he could see several other shinobi, including Kakashi and Guy, as well as Lee, Sakura, and Ino. Choji, Kiba, Shino, and Hinata stood in various positions on his right. With a small smile, Shikamaru began to feel more confident. These were excellent ninjas and he would trust his life to any of them. He could think of no better honor than to fight by their sides. With a puff of smoke, Sasuke and Naruto appeared in front of him, Tenten, Neji, and 2 other Anbu behind them. They nodded in greeting at Shikamaru, before turning to survey the enemy. You know, Sasuke, Naruto said. I think I liked Akatsuki better when Itachi was in charge. They were less destructive, more goal-oriented, and most importantly, much smaller. The Konoha shinobi hadn't been speaking, but at the masked man's words a tense silence overtook them. Everyone, even those who had never met Sasuke, knew of Itachi and the destructive means Sasuke had gone to for revenge. They awaited Sasuke's response in anxiety, wondering if perhaps this masked shinobi would be the first to fall today. The white fox mask slowly turned to the blue-eyed man, who looked steadily at the wooden face. I'm going to beat the shit out of you when this is over, the voice from behind the mask said. The blue eyes twinkled. Promise? Yes. Several shinobi breathed sighs of relief. Others shivered at the thought of Uchiha Sasuke's wrath. Only a select few, Jiraiya and Shikamaru, who knew their history, Kakashi and Guy, who understood friendly rivalry, and, of course, Naruto and Sasuke saw the meaning behind the words. We're both going to survive this. Promise? Yes. There was a shift at the top of the hill and Orochimaru in Kabuto's body rode into view, standing comfortably on the head of a giant snake. The flashy snake entrance isn't quite as intimidating after you've seen it so many times, Naruto said quietly, rolling of his eyes. Sasuke nodded in agreement. Konoha ninjas, Shikamaru said loudly so that all of those under his command could hear him. Our mission is to protect this village and stop Akatsuki, no matter what the cost. What we do today protects Konoha. If we fail, this army is headed towards our village. Protect Konoha. There was a loud cry of agreement from the shinobi behind him. Orochimaru laughed, folding his arms across his chest. With a simple nod to his subordinates, the shinobi at the top of the hill began to charge. Arming themselves with kunai, shuriken, and other weapons, the ninja of Konoha prepared for battle. Sasuke and the four Anbu behind him pulled their katana from their backs. Naruto noticed that Neji and Tenten had weapons that differed from their comrades. Neji held a long dagger in his hand while Tenten had two katana that were shorter than the others. Spinning them once to get a solid grip on them, she made her way quickly to the right flank, followed by Neji. The other two Anbu moved to the left, leaving Sasuke and Naruto in the middle. Naruto had never seen Sasuke wield a katana, but he was not surprised at the fluidity and grace of his movements as the first of the enemy reached them and were instantly struck down. Sasuke stabbed one Akatsuki member and, wrenching the katana from the man's abdomen, he spun to strike at another. Naruto didn't have time to admire Sasuke's skills for long, however, for the sheer numbers the Akatsuki possessed had descended upon him and his attention had to be focused on his own battles. Fortunately, Naruto noticed as he ducked a punch aimed for his jaw, the prestige that members of the Akatsuki formerly possessed did not seem to apply to them anymore. These ninjas were not S-class nin. Many of them weren't even Junin. It appeared that Orochimaru was going for strength and numbers. With a swift blow to the head with the blunt end of his kunai, the shinobi attacking Naruto fell face first into the grass. Naruto sensed rather than saw the kick coming from behind him and, turning quickly, he grabbed the attacker's ankle. With a sharp downward thrust of his elbow he broke the other man's leg at its joint. Naruto let him go and he toppled over, clutching desperately at his knee, his cries joining in with the yells and screams of others on the hill that had turned into a battlefield. Leaping into the air, Naruto dodged two kunai that had been thrown at him and they embedded into the ground with soft thunks. A fist came at him from nowhere and he blocked it, punching his assailant in the stomach. Shinobi began charging him in pairs. This was ridiculous. Every time one was struck down, three more would take his place. Chancing a glance around, he saw that Konoha's already small force was rapidly declining. Sakura had given up fighting and was now tending to the injured of their side, as were several other medical nins. The Anbu were faring well. Their swords allowed them to kill many enemies with ease and close-range fighting was their specialty. Neji could maneuver easily with his dagger, getting in close to his enemies and cutting off their chakra flow with his free hand or limbs with his dagger. Naruto grimaced as he saw a man on his knees in front of Tenten, remaining absolutely still. Her twin blades were crossed in front of his neck. Pulling her arms apart quickly, the man's neck was sliced open, blood splattering across her white mask. A flash of pink caught Naruto's eye and he watched Sakura run to Kiba, who had just killed several sword-wielding Akatsuki members, but had sustained a deep wound in his leg for his trouble. Naruto looked to Sasuke and grimly noticed that even he appeared to be struggling with the never-ending onslaught of enemies. No matter how many were killed, more continued coming. They needed more fighters. At this rate they couldn't possibly win. He tossed a kunai into the heart of an advancing attacker before gritting his teeth. This was most likely going to blow his cover. Between Kakashi's Sharingan, the Hyuga's Byakugan, Kiba's nose, and Sakura's intelligence, he had no doubt someone, if not everyone, would figure him out. But what was the point of protecting them from himself only to let them die in battle? Raising his hands, he crossed two fingers of his right hand vertically over two of his left. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He could hear the pause in the fighting as ally and enemy alike looked around in amazement at the hundreds of masked figures that had appeared in the fray. Using the confusion to his advantage, the Narutos began to attack. The Konoha ninjas recovered from their surprise and resumed fighting with renewed vigor. Several shinobi had to struggle to get their heads back into the battle, however, for they now knew the identity of the masked man.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.